Chapter 123. Fuck! Lou DePeo, who was wearing the doorman mask, cursed angrily. He was very unhappy. Extremely, extremely unhappy. Today, his gun had been kicked out of his hand twice. 2 times. For a person like him, who got the nickname DePeo because of his outstanding marksmanship, his gun was his lifeblood. But today, he had lost his gun twice in a row. Just now, the shot that was clearly going to hit its target was diverted by Poplar Fruit's interference. He glared fiercely at Poplar Fruit, who had kicked him this time. Just now, he was entangled by the security guard uncle, so he did not notice the situation at Su Pan's side. But the guy in front of him was white and tender, tall and thin, just like a scholar. At first glance, he knew that he was easy to bully. Lou DePeo sneered and leaned forward. His right fist was like a hook, aimed at Poplar Fruit's left ear. Lou DePeo had never learned martial arts. In the past, he only played with guns in the army. He did not learn military boxing well. But after following the Thais for years, he had learned a few moves under their influence. His uppercut looked like a real uppercut. At this moment, Poplar Fruit was not the normal Poplar Fruit. He had entered a berserk state. His reaction speed was more agile than before, and his beast-like strength was completely released. The Taiji fist that he practiced every day was now executed as if it was a normal reaction of his body. Taiji fist press. Poplar Fruit took a deep breath and held his chest. His back was as straight as a mountain. His left palm pulled Lou DePeo's fist. Relying on his waist, he lifted Lou DePeo's right arm up. Lou DePeo was shocked, but his body could not stop. He leaned towards Poplar Fruit. At this moment, Lou DePeo was wide open. He did not know how to break free. Poplar Fruit's face was grim. His eyes were ruthless as he stared at Lou DePeo's eyes. He met Lou DePeo's attack with his left and right fists and punched his chest 10 times. Poplar Fruit's strength was great. Although he could not use all his strength in this position, he could clearly feel that each of his punches broke 1 or 2 of Lou DePeo's ribs. Finally, the most powerful punch, Poplar Fruit, hit Lou DePeo's heart. Lou DePeo was as if he was struck by lightning. His body shook. His eyes, nostrils, and mouth were bleeding. His body was as if his bones were pulled out. At this moment, Poplar Fruit's eyes were red. He did not notice that Lou DePeo was on the verge of death. He swept his right leg and lifted Lou DePeo up again. He went forward and grabbed him. With a shake of his arms, he threw Lou DePeo to the resting area. Lou DePeo's body knocked over a few benches in the resting area before rolling to the ground. Poplar Fruit's situation was good. However, he went to a situation was not so good. After he was sent flying by his boss's kick, he could not catch his breath. He could not get up. His abdomen was kicked by his boss again. His whole body slid a few meters on the smooth tile floor. In the end, he stopped when his head hit the wall. His boss pulled off his mask and walked up with a cold smile. He stuttered in Chinese, "You want to stop me? You're not enough. You're dead meat." This kick caused Hiwunjua to vomit gastric juices. His fingers trembled as he pressed them on the ground. He could only watch as his boss walked closer with a cold smile. "Damn it, I can't even meet such a strong enemy in this small place. I'm the captain of the Special Forces in Yanqing. I can't even beat him. What a disgrace. Looks like I'm going to die here today. It's a pity that I dragged that little brother down with me." Although he was complaining in his heart, Hiwunjua's heart was calm. Isn't it just death? Crash! A series of loud sounds suddenly rang out. The boss stopped and looked over in confusion. He saw Lou DePeo lying in the middle of 2 benches. He was motionless and unconscious. He then looked at Su Pan, who was lying on the ground with a broken arm. He was also unconscious. Only then did the boss realize that he was fighting with the most difficult enemy to deal with. In this gap where he could not be distracted, 2 of his subordinates had been defeated. Moreover, Su Pan, his most trusted little brother, had a broken arm and was lying there with serious injuries. How is this possible? Su Pan also learned Muay Thai. Although he was young, he was still half as strong as the boss. The main culprit was that Poplar Fruit that he thought didn't have any killing power at first glance. The boss's expression was very interesting. One moment he was furious, the next moment he was in disbelief. One moment his face was black, and the next moment his face was red. But his little brother's injuries completely ignited the anger in Supan's heart. He clenched his teeth and pointed at Poplar Fruit with his trembling right index finger. He said word by word, "You will be cut into 10,000 pieces." Although his grammar was a mess, his murderous aura was like a prairie fire. With the last word pieces, it engulfed everything. The people at the back saw that Yongwa had taken care of the two people, so they came back to their senses and were ready to cheer. However, when they heard their boss's words, they were so scared that they swallowed their cheers. Poplar Fruit was still in a mysterious state. He wasn't affected by the boss's murderous aura. He was half in a horse stance and focused on the boss's hands and feet. At this moment, any movement in the wind could be magnified dozens of times in Poplar Fruit's ears. Every movement was as clear as it could be in slow motion in his eyes. The boss didn't pull out the pistol on his back. He only wanted to use his strongest fist to avenge his little brother. He roared and rushed over, wanting to kick Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit calmly pulled the boss's leg to release the strength. Then he lifted the boss up. His actions were exactly the same as when he dealt with his two subordinates. However, the boss's martial arts were much better than Supan and the others. Poplar Fruit only lifted him up, but the boss used his upper body as an axis to jump up. He kicked his other leg towards Poplar Fruit's shin. Poplar Fruit didn't expect him to be able to counterattack in this situation. He hurriedly blocked with his arm to protect his chin. However, his arm was still in pain from the boss's kick. At this time, the boss did a backflip and landed steadily. So strong, Poplar Fruit thought. Hiwenjua, who was lying on the side, hadn't recovered. Although he couldn't stand up or speak, he still saw the fight between Poplar Fruit and the others. He thought, "So, I'm the weakest. Little brother, do your best. Kill him." Hiwenjua was also trying his best to adjust his breathing. As long as he could help, the two of them would definitely be able to take down this Muay Thai expert. Poplar Fruit was at a disadvantage from the start. The boss's Muay Thai was much more powerful than Supan's. All kinds of tricky and fierce moves were used. Poplar Fruit, who didn't know anything about Muay Thai, couldn't parry them. In Muay Thai, the most powerful moves weren't the fists but the elbows and knees. Flat elbows, pressing elbows, smashing elbows, covering elbows, double elbows, rushing knees, bending knees, stabbing knees, piercing knees, flying knees, etc. These were the most powerful moves in Muay Thai. Someone once said, "It's better to use your elbows and knees than your fists." The elbows were the hardest, while the knees were the heaviest. If you hit someone with these two moves, it would be easy to make them lose their ability to fight due to the pain. If it was said that Poplar Fruit could still counterattack against the fists and legs, but against the boss's elbows and knees, Poplar Fruit could only clench his teeth and block. But after 2 or 3 times, Poplar Fruit's arm was covered in red and green bruises. It was very painful. Poplar Fruit could feel a slight warm flow in his body, slowly warming up the area that was hit. But the effect was too slow. If this continued, sooner or later he wouldn't be able to hold on. Think. Under the stimulation of adrenaline, Poplar Fruit's mind became clearer. He forced himself to use his brain to think of how to fight and not rely on his instincts to make a move. Elbows and knees. Aren't those moves only used by the boss when he gets close? That's right. As long as I keep a distance from him, he won't be able to use those moves on me. There was a chant in Taiji Fist. Let him hit me with all his might. Pull him with 4 tails to lift 1,000 Jin. Let him hit me with all his might. 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 Why do I have to tangle with him? Isn't this using my weak points to attack his strong points? Suddenly enlightened, Poplar Fruit began to pull away from the boss by 2 body lengths. You advance and I retreat. You retreat and I advance. Of course, Poplar Fruit wasn't just retreating. He relied more on his nimble body movements to circle around the boss and coordinate with his hand gestures to make his attacks miss. This time it was the boss's turn to suffer. His punches and kicks were mainly fierce, aiming to rely on speed and strength to defeat the enemy. Right now, his speed couldn't keep up with Poplar Fruit's and his strength was hitting the air. Every time he punched with all his strength, his chest felt stuffy. After circling around for a while, the boss began to feel tired. He panted heavily, and his eyes were a little unfocused. It had been too long since he met such a difficult opponent. His body was far from being as strong as it was when he was young. It's time to counterattack. Poplar Fruit understood. He took advantage of the boss not being able to pull back his punches in time to suddenly stop retreating and turn around. Although Poplar Fruit hadn't fought with anyone before today, when he fought with Supan and Lou DePeo, he was completely bloodthirsty. He didn't care how badly he beat the enemy. At this time, Poplar Fruit couldn't hold back his strength. Poplar Fruit suddenly used his right foot as an axis and circled to the boss's side. His left hand grabbed the boss's left fist, and his right arm blocked the boss's left elbow. Suddenly, he pulled outwards. Although it seemed like a lot of movements, in reality, it all happened in a flash. With a crisp sound and a scream, Poplar Fruit directly broke the boss's left arm. "While you're sick, I'll take your life." Yang was swept his leg at the boss's knee, forcing him to kneel down. Then he followed up with a whip kick towards the boss's head. The boss fell to the ground like a sack. As soon as the boss turned around, his eyes were filled with Poplar Fruit's huge fist. He subconsciously tilted his head. Poplar Fruit's fist brushed past his ear and smashed into the floor. The mirror-like tiles actually cracked. "Dodge? Let's see how many you can dodge." Poplar Fruit smashed again with all his strength. The boss raised his right arm to block in front of his face, but with a crack, his right arm broke. In the end, Poplar Fruit's fist still landed on the boss's head. Although the strength was much weaker, it was still powerful. With a muffled bang, the boss's eyes rolled back, and he fainted while spitting out blood. Poplar Fruit still didn't let go. He raised his right fist high and prepared to smash down again. "Enough! If you hit him again, he'll die." A pair of big hands pulled Poplar Fruit's fist and anxiously called out. It was Iwunjua, who had just recovered. Chapter 124. Poplar Fruit's right fist was being held. He still wanted to struggle and even throw the person holding him away. Fortunately, he heard Iwunjua's voice, so he withdrew his strength. "Is it over?" Poplar Fruit looked at the boss, who was being beaten by him on the ground, and muttered, "Cough, cough, it's over. You beat them all down, ha, cough, cough." Perhaps it was because he had just been kicked by the boss, and because he had used a lot of strength to hold Poplar Fruit's hand, Iwunjua had just opened his mouth when the muscles in his lungs spasmed again, and he coughed violently. The boss's state at this time was that his eyes had turned white, and he was exhaling more than he was inhaling. He was about to die. Poplar Fruit suddenly got off his body in a hurry and stepped away from this person. His eyes were filled with fear. This was me? Iwunjua put away the 3 pistols, then sat beside Poplar Fruit and patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder. He laughed heartily and said, "Yes, it was you. Good job, little brother. I didn't expect you to be so powerful. I owe you my life." Poplar Fruit didn't listen to Iwunjua at all. He was still in a state of delirium. "He's dying. I killed him. I killed him." Iwunjua patted Poplar Fruit's face and said seriously, "Little brother, look at me." He shouted too loudly, and he coughed violently again. He stared into Poplar Fruit's eyes and said, "Listen, you didn't kill anyone. Even if you did, what you did was right. These people were all vicious criminals, and they had guns. In that situation, if you didn't kill them, they would kill you. Do you understand?" Cough. Poplar Fruit lay on the ground and retched. After a while, he felt a little better. This fight had completely exceeded his own imagination. He had never thought that he could fight so well. Moreover, he had been able to injure and cripple his opponents so easily. The impact on his heart was too great. Iwunjua patted Poplar Fruit's back and wanted to continue persuading him. Poplar Fruit supported himself with his hand, sat back, and waved his hand with a pale face. He said, Big brother, thank you. I'm fine. How are the others? After they knocked down the gangster, the other people in the bank hall, who were still in shock, slowly came back to their senses. The two women who knew each other began to hug each other, and the others slowly sat up straight on the ground. The after effects of surviving a disaster, the weakness in their limbs, was not something that would disappear in a short time. The high school girls were much better. 3 of them who were not bullied crawled to the girl lying on the ground, hugged her, and helped her tidy up her clothes. The girl's head leaned weakly on their shoulders, sobbing. She felt lucky, but more than that, she felt wronged and scared. The police finally arrived at Shanshan. Dozens of cars surrounded the bank entrance, and the person in charge shouted through a loudspeaker for the criminals to surrender. Poplar Fruit looked like he was sleepwalking. He didn't know how Wonjua called the police in. The police stared dumbfounded at the mess in the bank hall. They called an ambulance to pick up the 3 criminals, the injured old man, and the security guard uncle. Then, they arranged for several police cars to take the rest of the people back to the police station. When Poplar Fruit came back to his senses, he was already sitting in the police station. Wonjua was sitting opposite him with a smile. What's going on? Poplar Fruit looked at Wonjua in confusion. Little brother, your martial arts are good, but you're still not brave enough. You're scared out of your wits over a small matter. Wonjua laughed. Poplar Fruit shook his head and asked, What's going on now? We're taking a statement at the police station, Wonjua said. But it's okay. I've already recorded it for you. Poplar Fruit, right? I'm sorry, I didn't ask for your permission to see your ID card. Wonjua lightly tossed a wallet into Yonggua's hand. It's okay. Poplar Fruit forced a smile. This time, I really have to thank you, Brother Yang. Wonjua said seriously. You saved me twice. The first time, if you didn't kick me, I would have been shot. The second time, you helped me defeat the Muay Thai master. Poplar Fruit smiled embarrassedly. You don't have to be like this. I was in a hurry and didn't think too much. How is it? Is the case solved now? How can it be so fast, Of the 3 people, 1 is dead and 2 are injured. The injured one is still lying in the hospital. It's estimated that it won't be so fast. And now, with such a big case, the provincial office has already sent someone to take over. Don't worry. Wonjua laughed. Someone died? Poplar Fruit's face paled. Don't worry. Wonjua went to Poplar Fruit's side, patted Poplar Fruit's arm with his stout arm, and said, You're just defending yourself. I've already helped you deal with it. No one will trouble you. Thank you, big brother. Poplar Fruit gratefully said. No, this is what I should do. Wonjua waved his hand and said, You saved me. I should be thanking you. You don't have to thank me. A thick and magnetic middle-aged man's voice sounded behind Poplar Fruit. If you want to say thank you, I should be the one thanking you. The person who came was a man in his 40s, wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He looked cultured and elegant, like a teacher from a university. When Wonjua saw him, he quickly stood up and said, County Magistrate Chen, why are you here? This time he came down for a mission, and he had dealt with the leaders of the county. Although his military rank was very high, he still showed due respect to the local leaders. County Magistrate? When Poplar Fruit saw this, he also quickly stood up. Sit down, sit down. County Magistrate Chun pressed their shoulders and asked them to sit back down. He said gratefully, I heard about this matter from them. I'm really grateful to you today. Oh, County Magistrate Chun, you're too kind. Wonjua laughed. At least I'm still a soldier. It's our duty to protect the safety of the people's property. In this kind of situation, I can't just stand by and watch. Poplar Fruit didn't know how to answer, but he also nodded. No, thank you. I'm not just thanking you as a county magistrate for helping my county to resolve a crisis, County Magistrate Chen said. I'm thanking you as a father for saving my daughter. This time, Poplar Fruit and Wonjua were stunned. Poplar Fruit hesitated and asked, That girl is your daughter? Yes, she's my daughter. Now her mood is still unstable, and she's still in the hospital, so she can't come with me. My daughter's chastity was saved by the 2 of you. I'm here, bowing to the 2 of you. Thank you for saving my daughter's life. When he said this, the old man's tears fell. This county magistrate was now just a poor girl's father. He was full of tears, and he deeply bowed to Poplar Fruit and Winjua, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Please use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 125. Daddy. Kiki stretched out her hand and touched her daddy's chin. There was a new stubble there, and it was a little prickly. Kiki was both afraid and delighted at the same time. Poplar Fruit caught her off guard and clamped down on Kiki's hand with his chin and neck. The stubble rubbed against her hand gently, causing Kiki to frown in pain. She was so anxious that she was about to cry. Poplar Fruit knew when to stop and let go of Kiki with a chuckle. However, Kiki did not learn her lesson. After her hand stopped hurting, she chuckled and touched her daddy's chin again. Even after so many times, she still did not find it annoying. As Poplar Fruit teased Kiki, he sighed at yesterday's miraculous experience. It was rare for him to make a trip to his hometown's bank, but he encountered a robbery. Furthermore, the robbers were not ordinary people, but foreign Muay Thai masters. Those robbers probably did not expect that there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers in the bank. Not only was there the captain of the special forces from Yangqing City's military, but there was also Poplar Fruit, a martial arts master who did not even know his own strength. Actually, they had guns. If not for the fact that they wanted to make a move on that beautiful high school girl, they would not have let their guard down. That gave the infuriated Poplar Fruit and He Wenjua a chance to retaliate. This battle was won by a hair's breadth. However, Poplar Fruit and He Wenjua did not expect that the high school girl they saved would be the county head of Poplar Fruit's hometown. After this trip, Poplar Fruit and the captain of the special forces from Yangqing City's military had formed a life and death friendship. He Wenjua even addressed Poplar Fruit as his brother before he left, and even invited him to visit his house when he was free. Not only that, Poplar Fruit had also become the county head's benefactor. In China, it was easier to get things done with connections. In a small county like his hometown, to be able to form a relationship with an official was definitely a source of wealth. The benefits were immediate. At the thank you banquet held by the county magistrate at noon, Poplar Fruit only mentioned the business of his sister and brother-in-law when County Magistrate Chen asked about it. County Magistrate Chen patted his chest and said, "Open a store? No problem. I'll get someone to pick a good store for you in a new trade city at the station." Therefore, before his sister and brother-in-law's business had even started, they had already developed from a purely online business to a two-pronged business, both online and offline. Let's not talk about whether the online store could make money. Just look at the Poplar Fruit at the station. There was a good store in a newly built trade city that sold everything for money. What's more, County Head Chen had taken the initiative to fight for low-interest loans to support small and micro-industries, as well as the lowest shop rent. Everything happened too fast and too suddenly. Poplar Fruit still felt like he was in a dream. However, Poplar Fruit didn't want such a thing to happen again. That was because he was no longer alone. His every move affected the hearts of his entire family. Yesterday at the police station, he only saw his family when it was almost nighttime. His mother, who had been worried when she heard the gunshot, hugged Poplar Fruit tightly when she saw him. She was afraid that her son would be gone if she turned around. His sister also pulled Poplar Fruit to check on him with red eyes. She only relaxed when she saw that Poplar Fruit wasn't missing any parts. Not only was his family worried, but Poplar Fruit also couldn't hold back. He hugged Kiki, who had cried for a long time and finally fell into a deep sleep. His heart ached. He knew that when he wasn't by her side, Kiki needed her father too much. If something really happened to him because of the robbery, what would happen to Kiki? Kiki didn't have a mother and a father. How could she survive at such a young age? Poplar Fruit didn't dare to think about it. He just hugged his daughter and didn't want to let go for a long time. He Wenjua asked Magistrate Chun to keep the details of the case confidential, especially the information about him and Poplar Fruit. He Wenjua considered that on one hand, his identity was special. On the other hand, he didn't know if these robbers had accomplices who went out to protect Poplar Fruit. He Wenjua hoped that fewer people knew about this matter. Poplar Fruit obviously didn't have any objections. He also didn't want this matter to cause an uproar and become the talk of the town. After returning home, his father, Yang Tai, asked about his well-being again. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly as he fed Kiki milk and coaxed her to sleep. Then, he closed the door and went to sleep. To be honest, after a big battle and a day and night of torment, Poplar Fruit was really tired. However, the physical tiredness was secondary. More importantly, he was mentally exhausted. He had been under a lot of pressure at the bank. After that, he didn't rest. He had been going through the procedures at the police station and chatting with the magistrate. It was only now that he could truly relax. He was physically and mentally exhausted. Ever since Poplar Fruit started practicing the internal martial arts, he hadn't been this tired. Therefore, he slept from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until it was pitch black outside. Poplar Fruit woke up because of Kiki's cries from the baby's stroller that was laid flat like a cradle. In the dark, Poplar Fruit sat on the bed in a daze for a while. Only then did he completely wake up. He just had a dream. He dreamed that Lu DePeo, who was killed by him, Su Pan, who was injured and crippled by him, and Boss, who was actually alive and kicking, came running to him for revenge. Poplar Fruit showed his might and beat them away. However, in the end, they actually snatched Kiki away. Kiki called out Daddy with all her might, but Poplar Fruit couldn't catch up to her no matter how hard he tried. Fortunately, Kiki was still there. Poplar Fruit carried Kiki in the dark. Kiki couldn't see her father clearly, but she could clearly feel her father's heartbeat and smell. She was very happy. Yonghua hugged her and kissed her fair and tender little face in a sentimental manner. In the end, his unshaven chin pricked Chi-Chi's cheeks again, causing her to cry out in pain. Poplar Fruit secretly said in his heart, "Kiki, don't be afraid. Daddy will definitely not let those bad people hurt you." Yes, no matter how vicious the criminals were, if they wanted to bully Kiki, they would have to step over Kiki's guardian, Poplar Fruit. "Fruit, are you awake?" Yang Ping's voice came from the courtyard. She probably heard the sound of Kiki and Poplar Fruit playing. "I'm awake," Poplar Fruit replied loudly. "Since you're awake, then come out. It's time to eat." Su Jinfeng shouted loudly. "Okay, I'll be right out." Poplar Fruit put on a small jacket for Kiki, then pushed open the door and carried her out. Why didn't you turn on the lights?" Poplar Fruit was puzzled when he pushed open the door, but it was still dark. "There's no electricity?" Poplar Fruit walked towards the few dark figures in the darkness. He could vaguely make out the figures of his mother, sister, and father. Suddenly, their singing sounded in the courtyard. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." "What's going on?" Poplar Fruit felt a bright light appear beside him. He turned his head and saw Yang Chengwan walking out from the side room with a big cake. Behind him was a bouncing little tail. There were many candles on the cake. The flickering candlelight illuminated the night and made it extremely warm. Today is November 13th. Poplar Fruit calculated in his heart. Today is my birthday. Poplar Fruit realized that he had forgotten that today was his birthday. However, his family remembered and even prepared such a beautiful birthday cake and celebration ceremony for him. "Happy birthday to you." The birthday song was finally finished. His sister clapped and cheered. "Fruit, happy 24th birthday to you." Everyone cheered too. Even Kiki was shouting and clapping her little hands. She didn't know what was happening, but she felt that everyone was clapping and shouting. The atmosphere was so happy that Kiki followed suit. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, sister. Thank you, brother-in-law. Thank you, Jie." And Poplar Fruit smiled and kissed Kiki, saying, "Thank you, my baby girl. Kiki, quickly make a wish and blow out the candles." Yang Ping walked up and carried Kiki over. Poplar Fruit felt extremely happy at that moment. He clenched his fists and murmured with his eyes closed, "I'm 1 year older. In the new year, I hope that my family will be healthy and happy. I hope that Kiki can grow up happily and healthily, but don't grow too fast. Dad still likes your cute look? Ha! I also hope." Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment. A blurry figure flashed in his mind, but he still extinguished that impossible thought and continued, "I hope that in the future, I can find a good girl who loves Kiki and me. Then I can hold her hand and Kiki's hand. Our family will never leave each other. and we'll continue to walk together." Seeing that Poplar Fruit opened his eyes, everyone began to shout in unison, "Blow out the candles, blow out the candles, blow out all of them." Kiki was also unwilling to be left out, so she followed along and shouted, 24 candles. So many. You guys, do you think I can't finish blowing all of them?" Poplar Fruit shouted mischievously. He took a deep breath, bent down, and blew fiercely. Then, from left to right, all 24 candles were blown out. Brother-in-law was the first to turn on the lights in the courtyard. The courtyard was suddenly lit up. Poplar Fruit squinted his eyes and saw the smiles on the faces of his family members. Kiki was still in a daze from the change of darkness to light. She tilted her head, looked left and right, and finally found her father. The most excited one was Yang Lingjie. He pulled the corner of his mother's clothes and jumped, shouting excitedly, "Eat cake! Eat cake!" Everyone was amused by this gluttonous child and burst out in laughter. Laughter reverberated throughout the entire courtyard. Even the resplendent starry sky could not hide the radiance of happiness. In another world shrouded by the starry sky, a small boat was speeding on the vast ocean. It was quietly drifting across the country's border under the cover of night. Along the way, it was daunting but not dangerous. Finally, it reached the waters of Vietnam. Suddenly, a head stretched out from the cabin. He looked longingly at the road he came from, even though it was also a boundless dark ocean. "Smoker, what are you doing? Sit tight, the boat is not stable." A voice came from behind. The head looked hatefully in the direction of the small county that made them suffer. He swore in a low voice, "Boss, big pow, just you wait. I will definitely come back to avenge you. Everyone, use your votes to smash the poor. Greater than over equal to." Chapter 126. I'm back. When he got home, Poplar Fruit carried Kiki and knocked on Song Jiwen's door. The door wasn't closed properly, so Poplar Fruit opened it. He walked in and shouted, "You're back." Song Jiwen poked his head out from behind the sofa and said weakly, "What's wrong with you?" Poplar Fruit took a few steps back with Kiki in his arms. "Are you sick? Why didn't you close the door?" He was worried that if Song Jiwen caught a cold, he would pass it to Kiki. "No, you're the one who's sick." Song Jiwen didn't even bother to roll his eyes and said in a low voice. Then he fell back onto the sofa. "What's wrong with you?" Since he wasn't sick, Poplar Fruit was relieved. He carried Kiki to the front of the sofa and sat on the coffee table. He looked at Song Jiwen and asked. Poplar Fruit finally saw how dispirited Song Jiwen was. His hair was messy, and his eyes were bloodshot. It was already 4:00 in the afternoon, but he was still lying on the sofa in a daze. Hey, Poplar Fruit kicked him. "Wake up. Look at you. What's wrong with you?" Song Jiwen sat up in a daze. He leaned his head on the sofa and didn't speak. Poplar Fruit walked around the living room with Kiki in his arms. He said, "Why are you so dispirited now? Don't tell me you're heartbroken like me? That's not right. Weren't you the one who broke up?" The breakup Poplar Fruit was talking about was a few days ago. At that time, when he was still in his hometown, Song Jiwen called and said that he had broken up with Xiao Yao. On the phone, Song Jiwen was very happy, as if he had gotten rid of a heavy burden. Song Jiwen had long wanted to break up with Xiao Yao. Song Jiwen and Xiao Yao had been dating for more than half a year. This was something that Poplar Fruit found hard to believe. In the past, when he was chatting and joking with Song Jiwen at home, Poplar Fruit would tease him and ask if he had turned over a new leaf. Song Jiwen had never been in a long-term relationship before. The girlfriends he had been in before were only together for 2 to 3 days, and no more than a month. Some girls could even be described as sex friends. He was a womanizer. When they were in university, Song Jiwen once declared after getting drunk, "Before the age of 28, I won't consider marriage or long-term love." But this time, he and Little Demon had been together for half a year. It was a miracle among miracles. 2 months ago, Song Jiwen finally couldn't help but tell Poplar Fruit the truth. So, he had wanted to break up with her for a long time. However, facing Xiao Yao, he swallowed back the words that were about to come out of his mouth several times. This girl was too innocent. If he broke up with her like this, it would only hurt her badly. Although Xiao Yao usually dressed very kawaii and liked to speak softly and coquettishly, that was only because she had watched too many cartoons in Nihon country. She was a little brainless. She was a typical post-90s girl, although she was actually born in the late 80s. She was playful, had a personality, and had a very unique way of thinking. However, Xiao Yao was a very pure girl. When she was with Song Ji-won, she was still pure and was very conservative about relationships. Other than the fact that she was influenced by anime, she was really like a blank piece of paper. Her heart was very pure, and she believed that everything was beautiful. Therefore, as a public kindergarten teacher, she was especially liked by children and parents. Song Ji-won really didn't know how to break up with such a girl. Xiao Yao wanted to stick to him all day long. Song Ji-won was a little tired of it and wanted to find a new passion. However, he was worried that if he broke up with her, this crystal-like girl would be smashed into pieces again. Therefore, the two of them were entangled for half a year until Xiao Yao said that she wanted to deepen the relationship between the two of them. She planned to change to a job closer to here and then move in with Song Ji-won. Song Ji-won's character couldn't be restrained. He wanted to live a single life, but he was unwilling to be lonely and wanted to pursue excitement. This time, Xiao Yao really scared Song Ji-won. He couldn't delay it any longer. If he delayed it any longer, wouldn't Xiao Yao be insatiable and propose to him? Song Ji-won decided to cut the Gordian knot and settle this matter as soon as possible so that he wouldn't delay this good girl. He found an opportunity to ask Xiao Yao out and officially break up with her. Poplar Fruit didn't know what the situation was like at that time. Perhaps Xiao Yao was heartbroken and even begged, but Song Ji-won was really determined to break up with her. Being trapped by love like this wasn't Song Ji-won's style, right? For so many years, he had dumped so many girls, but he had never seen him so sad and haggard. Poplar Fruit asked doubtfully, "Don't tell me you only remember to cherish her after losing her? Since you can't bear to part with her, why don't you get Xiao Yao back?" "She's gone," Song Ji-won said in a low voice. His eyes were silently dripping with tears. "Gone? Where did she go?" Poplar Fruit asked, puzzled. "She didn't go anywhere. She's dead. She's gone." Song Ji-won shouted impatiently. "Dead? Dead?" Poplar Fruit was shocked. He couldn't believe this fact. A person was fine. How could she be gone? After asking for a long time, Poplar Fruit pieced together the whole story from Song Ji-won's intermittent responses. It turned out that after Kitten went home crying that day, she called Song Ji-won more than 10 times, but Song Ji-won didn't pick up. The next day, Kitten went to work. She didn't sleep the whole night and was thinking about something. She walked on the street absent-mindedly. Suddenly, she was hit by a car that ran a red light. She was sent to the hospital, but Xiao Yao wasn't saved. She might not even have the will to live. Song Ji-won couldn't speak clearly. He covered his face and choked with sobs. "If I didn't break up with her, this accident wouldn't have happened. Maybe she could have held on a little longer. Maybe she could have survived." Song Ji-won fell into deep self-blame at this moment. He repeated over and over again, "If we didn't break up, she wouldn't have died." Poplar Fruit sat beside him and put his arm around his shoulder. He wanted to comfort him, but he didn't know what to say. Thousands of words came out of his mouth, but they became a dry sentence. "Mosquito, it's not your fault." Song Ji-won looked back at Poplar Fruit and said, "Lao Gua, if you say it's not my fault, do you believe it?" Yes, Poplar Fruit didn't believe this sentence himself. If he put himself in Poplar Fruit's shoes, he would also take the blame. This could be seen from Wu Yu's difficult labor. He was still guilty of Wu Yu's death, although this guilt had slowly faded because of his fatherly love for Kiki. How could Poplar Fruit persuade him? He could only rack his brains and come up with different ways to tell Song Ji-won that Xiao Yao's death was already a fact. No matter how regretful he was, no matter how sad he was, he couldn't bring Xiao Yao back to life. Poplar Fruit was worried that Song Ji-won would fall sick from grief because of this, or even sink into depression. What you should do now is to change yourself. Don't treat relationships as child's play. In the future, you have to treat everyone who loves you seriously. Let Xiao Yao see you in heaven and feel a little gratified. Poplar Fruit said earnestly. At this moment, Song Jiwen's dim eyes seemed to have a bit of life. Chapter 127. Ever since Kiki learned how to crawl, she could no longer stay still. When she got home, she didn't want to stay in the cradle or crib all the time. Every day when she woke up, she was full of energy. Poplar Fruit let her crawl on the bed, but she couldn't get enough of it. She even wanted to climb over her father's guardrail and slip under the bed. So, Poplar Fruit went to great lengths to redecorate the living room, transforming it into Kiki's playground. First, he used a combination of cabinets and boxes to separate the living room and the dining room. Adults could step over the boxes to reach the kitchen and bathroom, but Kiki couldn't. The large cardboard box filled with heavy sandbags was an insurmountable mountain for Kiki. Next was the carpet. The weather was getting a little cold, so it wasn't a good idea to let Kiki crawl on the slippery tile floor all the time. So, Poplar Fruit bought a pure wool carpet that was big enough to cover the entire living room. It was said that it was made by Persians. Whether or not it was just a trick Poplar Fruit didn't know, but the carpet was very expensive. The whole Poplar Fruit spent almost 10,000 yuan. Poplar Fruit didn't care if his card was emptied because of the carpet. Instead, he felt that the money was well spent because the carpet was not only soft and comfortable, but also a little elastic. Even if Kiki learned how to walk in the future, she wouldn't feel pain if she accidentally fell down. In addition to the carpet, Poplar Fruit also bought a lot of cotton pads, and the protective pads were of good quality. They were filled with thick and soft cotton, not with inferior plastic and foam. Using these cotton pads, Poplar Fruit covered all the corners and even the edges of the house, including the coffee table and the legs of the table and chairs. After all, Kiki was still young, and Poplar Fruit was worried that Kiki would accidentally bump into something when she crawled. It took Poplar Fruit an entire day to get these things done. Of course, Song Jiwen had helped a lot. She did not know if this guy had really walked out of the shadow of the incident with Xiao Yao. It seemed that he had become less decadent this weekend. Moreover, he looked very energetic in his polo shirt. To be honest, there was a reason why Song Jiwen was able to fool around. The Song family was full of handsome men. Song Jiwen's father, Song Chunfeng, still looked very charming even though he was middle-aged. Song Jiwen had inherited his father's good qualities. He was known as the most handsome guy in the university. Although Poplar Fruit had surpassed her, that was only because of her figure and height. In terms of face, Song Jiwen was still better. Therefore, when Poplar Fruit and Song Jiwen walked out, they were two handsome men. It was just that one was a little taller and the other was a little shorter. One was dressed inappropriately while the other was very tasteful. Of course, the one who was dressed inappropriately was Poplar Fruit. Other than Givenchy, Poplar Fruit did not have any set of clothes that could be considered fashionable. Although he was rich, he did not change his mentality of being poor. However, there was an advantage to being tall, and that was that you looked good in anything. Even if it did not match, a pair of long legs was enough to attract people's attention. Today, it was all thanks to Song Jiwen's help that Poplar Fruit was able to buy so many things back. Later on, the carpet was also laid out with his help to move the cabinet and sofa. However, Song Jiwen had something to do at noon, so he left first, leaving Poplar Fruit alone to pack the cotton pads. After lunch, the rough renovation of Kiki's amusement park was completed. Although it was called an amusement park, it was just a venue. There was no entertainment. In order to make Kiki happy, Poplar Fruit even took all of Kiki's toys down from the bed. The toys were given by guests who came and went. The old neighbors Lu Gillen and his wife, the old leader, Du Ronghui, Uncle Jean, and Xinda Xiaodohua. When they came to Poplar Fruit, they would bring some gifts for Kiki. Most of them were toys. Duan Xueqing had also given her gifts once. However, the one who gave the most gifts was Zheng Yujie. She had bought a lot of toys in Guangzhou during the National Day holiday. Later, when Poplar Fruit went to Beijing, she asked her brother to buy a few toys in the pile of things. Adding all of these together, Kiki's toys had long exceeded 20. As Kiki's toys increased, Poplar Fruit had a headache. Although Kiki was young and didn't know anything, she was very clear about how many toys she had and what toys she had. If Poplar Fruit dared to hide any of her toys, she would dare to cry in front of Poplar Fruit. Usually, other than Kiki's favorite penguin pillow, Kiki's other toys were piled up on her father's bed. Every day, when she woke up from her crib, Kiki could play with them. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit's bed was big enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't even have a place to sleep. But now, the living room had become Kiki's playground. All of her toys could be placed there. There were dolls, music boxes, sports cars, and so on. There was also a wooden cart that could be pulled by a rope. There was a teddy bear sitting on it. Whenever the wooden cart started, the teddy bear would beat the drum. When Poplar Fruit carried Kiki into the living room, she couldn't wait to climb into her pile of toys. Perhaps she realized that her range of movement was many times larger than the bed she used to sleep on. Kiki flipped over on the floor and laughed happily. After making sure that the doors and windows were closed, Poplar Fruit picked up his book and walked to the balcony. With his back against the glass door and the quiet night outside, he began to read. During this period of time, Poplar Fruit didn't have much time to study. He was busy translating and running around. It wasn't until the day that he had time to pick up a book. Of course, he wasn't reading books for the postgraduate entrance exam. He had already finished his revision. Those political books that required rote memorization were really no pressure for Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit was now learning a new language, Russian, which had a population of 300 million people. This language had a very long history. In the early days, it was hieroglyphics. Later, it was influenced by Greek and Latin characters and slowly became what it was today. The Cyrillic alphabet wasn't like other European and American languages, which more or less had a similar origin to English. It could be said that it had its own unique way of writing and pronouncing. Poplar Fruit found it very difficult to learn. Compared to the past when learning French and Spanish was easy, the difficulty factor now was many times higher. However, for Poplar Fruit, who had a monstrous memory, it was only a matter of time before he defeated them, wasn't it? Kiki seemed to be very active in this small playground that her father had painstakingly created. Poplar Fruit was reading and would look at Kiki every few minutes. As a result, every time he looked at her, she would move her little but to a different position. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit had already surrounded the entire amusement park. Kiki could only move within the range of the living room. No matter how she crawled, she wouldn't crawl to a dangerous place outside. Bang! Suddenly, there was a small, muffled sound. Poplar Fruit was shocked. He looked up and saw that Kiki had bumped into the leg of the coffee table. This girl must have been crawling on the ground and didn't look in front, so she bumped into it. Although he had used a cotton pad as a protective measure, who knew if this protective measure would work? Didn't the car have protective measures? Collision bars, protective air cushions, and so on. With such comprehensive protection, if the car were to speed up, wouldn't the car crash and people die? Poplar Fruit quickly stood up and went to see how his daughter was doing. However, before Poplar Fruit went to Kiki's side, Kiki sat up by herself. She didn't cry. She touched her head, then lowered her head and touched the leg of the coffee table. Then, she laughed happily. Poplar Fruit squatted down and touched his daughter's little head. When he didn't find any swelling, he was relieved. However, when he saw her laughing foolishly, Poplar Fruit was both angry and amused. He rubbed her hair and scolded her in his heart. Little fool! Poplar Fruit went back to reading. Not long after he sat down, the harassment came. Kiki actually abandoned all her toys and crawled over on her hands and feet. Like a little pig, she buried her head in the crook of her father's arm. Her big eyes looked around to see what her father was doing. Yongwa patted her little, but that didn't have much meat, and then carried her out. Kiki had a persevering spirit. Just as Poplar Fruit put her on the ground, she crawled over again. However, this time, Poplar Fruit didn't let her have her way. Poplar Fruit reached out his right hand and blocked Kiki's little head. No matter how hard Kiki tried to crawl, she couldn't get over. After struggling for a while, Chi-Chi turned around and crawled back to her toy mountain with a pout. Then, she began to play again. Poplar Fruit checked on Kiki from time to time. Perhaps they had a telepathic connection, but when Poplar Fruit looked up, Kiki coincidentally turned her head. Seeing her father's gaze, Kiki giggled. Ever since she found out that her father was watching her, Kiki started to be restless again. He didn't know how her little brain worked. She actually knew how to tease her father at such a young age. Of course, it was also possible that Kiki was just doing something that made her happy. When Poplar Fruit looked up again, Kiki was gone. She hid. Poplar Fruit only needed to glance around to find the little rascal's trace. Chi-Chi squeezed herself into a small gap between the sofa and the back wall. However, her hiding was too unprofessional. Like an ostrich escaping for its life, she squeezed her head into the small gap without caring about her tail. Her little butt was still swaying outside. Poplar Fruit found it funny and didn't expose her. He very cooperatively called out, "Kiki." At this time, Kiki squeezed out of the gap in the sofa and raised her little head. Poplar Fruit saw this and couldn't stop laughing. She looked at her father leaning forward and back, and her big eyes revealed a proud smile. However, she didn't know that Poplar Fruit was laughing because her current appearance was too funny. Her face was covered in dust, and her thin hair was all standing up due to the static electricity from the sofa. She was exactly like a disheveled head and a dusty face. She was just like a little beggar. Too cute. She was cute, but he had to give her a bath again. Chapter 128. Before taking a bath, Poplar Fruit still had one more thing to do, and that was to feed Kiki rice paste. Otherwise, it would be sticky after the bath. Poplar Fruit had returned to his hometown, and his mother had taught him how to make rice paste. When Poplar Fruit learned that babies at this age had to eat rice paste as a supplement, he was sweating profusely. He had always thought that babies only drank milk when they were breastfeeding. In fact, when Kiki was 6 months old, Poplar Fruit should have made some supplement food for her every night. On one hand, supplement food could supplement the baby's nutrition. On the other hand, it could also train Kiki's chewing and swallowing ability. Although it was a little late to start now, it was not too late to mend the pen after the sheep had been lost. Before reading the book, the rice had been washed and soaked in a small pot. After running for so long, it had become soft. He lit the fire and boiled it. At this time, Poplar Fruit was not idle. He took out an egg, washed it, and boiled it in another pot. The boiled egg was peeled while it was hot. Although it was not the first time he peeled the egg, the hot egg still scalded Poplar Fruit and made Kiki, who was next to him, laugh. The peeled egg was white and tender, just like Kiki's skin. It was like an exquisite work of art. But the hateful Poplar Fruit still wanted to destroy it. He peeled the egg white, and while peeling, he stuffed the broken egg white into his mouth. He also licked his fingers. Egg white was not a good delicacy for a baby who was still very young. The baby's digestive tract barrier was not fully developed, and the protein molecules in the egg white were small. It was easy for it to enter the blood through the intestinal mucosa, and then it would cause allergic reactions such as skin eczema and hives. In the end, only the round egg yolk was left. Poplar Fruit did not even let go of the egg yolk. He peeled the egg yolk, put half of it into the bowl, and ate the other half. Kiki had just eaten supplement food, and there was too much egg yolk, which was not easy to digest. Poplar Fruit used a spoon to crush the remaining egg yolk into a paste and put it in a bowl to wait for the rice in the pot to cook. It was not enough to cook it into porridge. Poplar Fruit simmered it slowly for a long time. When he and Kiki were so hungry that their stomachs were growling, the porridge was soft and soft. This was called rice paste. The Yang family's rice paste was made with a special recipe, which was egg yolk paste. Although it was said to be a special recipe, it was just Poplar Fruit for his own entertainment. This way of eating was everywhere. Poplar Fruit scooped the egg yolk out of the bowl and into the pot. Then he poured in the milk and shook it slowly. Although the steps looked complicated, in reality, the only thing left was less than half a bowl of egg yolk rice paste. It was pitifully little, but Kiki was really too small, so she could only eat so little. Poplar Fruit had thought of making more and eating the rest. However, after eating it once, Poplar Fruit felt that he did not like this bland liquid food, so he decisively gave up the idea. While waiting for the boiling rice paste to cool down, Poplar Fruit heated up the leftovers from lunch. After the food was heated up, the rice paste could be fed to Kiki. Feeding Kiki rice paste was a long tug of war. Now that Kiki had tasted it a few times, she finally understood that rice paste was edible. It was not like the first time she tried it. She closed her mouth and refused to open it. In the end, the rice paste was all over her mouth and face, but she still did not eat it. However, Kiki was still not used to eating rice paste. How could it taste better than milk? Milk was not so troublesome. She could just suck on the pacifier and drink it without any hindrance. Rice paste was different. Although it was liquid, there was still a volume. If Kiki did not chew it, it would be difficult for her to swallow it. Come, Kiki, it's time for dinner. Poplar Fruit tried to tempt Kiki with his voice, but Kiki did not open her mouth. Kiki usually loved to laugh, but when she sat in the baby chair specially prepared for her, she subconsciously pursed her lips. Poplar Fruit moved his face closer and stared into her watery eyes. He threatened, Kiki, open your mouth. Do you hear me? Are you going to be obedient? I'm telling you, don't force me to make a move. If he is strong, he is strong. A cool breeze brushes the hills. If he is tyrannical, he is tyrannical. The moon shines over the river. Kiki seemed to understand these two proverbs. No matter how Poplar Fruit threatened her, she did not open her mouth. I'm really going to make a move. You're forcing me, Poplar Fruit said fiercely. Poplar Fruit put down the bowl and spoon, rolled up his right sleeve. He did not have a sleeve at all, and then swung his right hand in a circle in the air. After swinging his right hand in a circle, he put his hand in his trouser pocket and took out his phone. Finally, he plugged the phone into a small speaker next to him. Poplar Fruit snickered and snapped his fingers. He shouted, "Music!" A pleasant piece of music came out from the speaker of the small speaker. Chi-Chi immediately became spirited. She turned her head and focused all of her attention on the small speaker that was emitting the sound. Her ears perked up, and she listened carefully without missing a single word. Kiki loved listening to music the most. No matter if it was light music or songs, no matter if it was children's songs or pop songs, as long as the melody was beautiful, she would listen to it all. Moreover, when Kiki was listening to music, she was very engrossed. No one could disturb her. It could be said that she would not be moved even if the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. As she listened, Kiki's little mouth opened involuntarily. Poplar Fruit, whose evil plan succeeded, touched his chin with a sly smile. Then he used Kiki's little spoon to scoop up some egg yolk rice paste and gently put it into Kiki's mouth. When it touched Kiki's little tongue, she could not help but close her mouth. This way, when Poplar Fruit pulled out the spoon, Kiki had already put the egg yolk rice paste into her mouth. Kiki's mouth had the egg yolk rice paste that she did not like to eat. She glanced at this heartless father of hers with dissatisfaction. However, listening to the music was more important. Kiki was a magnanimous person and did not bicker with her father. Her little mouth pouted and moved up and down for a while before she swallowed it. Poplar Fruit picked up his food and sat at the side to eat. When Kiki opened her mouth, he immediately fed her another spoonful of soup. Just like that, Kiki ate almost half of the egg yolk rice paste quite quickly. However, Poplar Fruit then thought that if this continued, would Kiki be as absent-minded when eating in the future? Thus, he got up and turned off the music. This time, Kiki was unhappy. She pouted her little mouth and refused to open it. Poplar Fruit racked his brains before he finally let her take a bite. After that bite, Poplar Fruit immediately played the music as a reward. The music only played one Xiao Duan before Poplar Fruit paused it again, ignoring Kiki's tantrum. He waited until Kiki ate the egg yolk rice paste before he was willing to put down the music. Although it took more than an hour to finish this small bowl of egg yolk rice paste, Poplar Fruit wanted Kiki to understand that if you want to get, you have to give. No, Poplar Fruit actually did not think that far. He only wanted to cultivate Kiki's habit of taking the initiative to eat. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 129. Ever since Kiki started to grow teeth, Poplar Fruit began to take the trouble to check on her every day. He wished he could take a ruler and make notes for Kiki every day. Later, Song Jiwen couldn't stand it anymore. Whenever he saw Poplar Fruit showing signs of opening Kiki's mouth, he took 2 spoons from the kitchen and rushed over. He wanted to use the spoons to pry open Poplar Fruit's mouth and let him have a taste. It had been more than half a month since the press conference in Beijing. The sales results of the Chinese version of the biography of Steve Jobs had also been released. It was indeed very good. If you were modest, you could use the word hot to describe it. If you were honest, you could even use the word people come out to describe it. Dongxin Publishing was finally relieved from the tension and busyness. They also had time to send over 10 copies of Poplar Fruit's sample books. Poplar Fruit lovingly stroked the book that seemed to emit the fragrance of ink. He sighed. The hard work of translating this book for more than a month was finally worth it. Although he was as tired as a dog for more than a month and didn't earn much, he felt the highest sense of achievement. Poplar Fruit didn't keep these 10 copies of the sample books for himself. He sent one to his family. Although they couldn't understand it, it was still an achievement for him. He wanted them to share this happiness. Poplar Fruit sent 2 copies to Yao Dehua, who stood out to support him when he was at the heart of the struggle. He also sent 1 copy to Duan Xueqing and Song Jiwen. He also sent 1 copy to his basketball buddy, Uncle Su Kaijin. Uncle Su Kaijin was a cadre in the Department of Education. He had been promoted recently and could now be called Director Su, although he was only a deputy director. After becoming a deputy director, Uncle Su Kaijin didn't have much time to play basketball with Poplar Fruit. However, the relationship between the 2 families was very good. Poplar Fruit also visited him often. Once, when Poplar Fruit talked about the book he had translated being published, Uncle Su Kaijin laughed and scolded him for not bringing over a copy of his published book. So, when Poplar Fruit received the book, he sent it to Uncle Su Kaijin. Uncle Su Kaijin had been in the field of education for many years and could be considered half a scholar. When he received the book from Poplar Fruit, he couldn't put it down. On the one hand, it was translated by Poplar Fruit. On the other hand, this book was also a reference for him. After all, Poplar Fruit was also a feudal lord. He Kaijin, for the time being, to give it to whom to give it to in the future. The sales were booming, but at the same time, there were some disputes about the translation of the book. The most discussed topic was still the farewell love letter. Countless literati and poets rolled up their sleeves and went into battle. Translated versions of various styles and genres were hot on the internet. However, these could not hide the brilliance of Poplar Fruit. Very soon, the debate was drowned by the tide of good reviews. Everyone stopped thinking about the translation problem and really immersed themselves in the book. Through Poplar Fruit and the others, they built a bridge for everyone to understand the legend of Steve Jobs, who was not known to others. Poplar Fruit's heroic appearance at the press conference not only increased his Weibo fans by hundreds of thousands, but also brought him some unexpected interesting things. For example, Poplar Fruit received many invitations to film and film shows. Of course, they were only movies and shows that were not famous. He had not even heard of the director's name. Of course, Poplar Fruit rejected them. He had no intention of stepping into the entertainment industry. Now, he just wanted to be a handsome man quietly. That was a digression. After becoming famous, Poplar Fruit also received many calls for interviews. In the end, he rejected most of them and only accepted interviews from Yangqing Evening News and Tongsun News Network. Yangqing Evening News mainly wanted to understand the process of Poplar Fruit's translation of the book and some of Poplar Fruit's thoughts. As a state-owned newspaper, their interview was standard, and the final report was also standard. Poplar Fruit bought the newspaper to read. After flipping through it for a long time, he saw his own report in a small tofu block at the bottom right corner of page A5. It was less than 300 words. Poplar Fruit could only laugh at the shabby Yangqing Evening News Network. At that time, he chose Yangqing Evening News mainly because it was one of the most influential newspapers in the city where he lived. However, he did not expect it to be so small. It was so small that a non-professional news portal was better than it. Yes, Tongsun News Network had indeed shown a lot of sincerity. Not only were they well prepared for the reporters, but they also sent a professional photography team. They were also planning to make Poplar Fruit's news into a new program. Yes, this program was newly planned by Tongsun's news department. It was called A Day in China. It was different from reality. This news program was led by pictures and supplemented by text narration. It was designed to provide Chinese netizens with a platform where they could freely express their emotions and find resonance. This program did not need reporters or interviews. Instead, it solicited a wide range of manuscripts. Only then could the authenticity of this program be reflected, because only the people and things that really happened around them could make people feel emotional. However, they still needed to send reporters to interview this program in the early stages to make a name for themselves. Only then could they receive quality pictures. Poplar Fruit had provided them with excellent material. First of all, Poplar Fruit was a young man who had graduated more than a year ago. It could be said that he had not stepped into society for a long time. Young people at this stage should be young and inexperienced. They should still be facing society and their own future in a daze. They should still be receiving training and setbacks from their previous jobs. However, Poplar Fruit was different from most people. He had already walked his own path. Although it was not glorious, he had achieved a lot. He could earn more than 100,000 yuan a month as a fledgling. Such a news gimmick would definitely attract a lot of clicks. Poplar Fruit did not have any objections to Tung Sun wanting to film his daily life. However, he put forward a condition, and that was to advertise Xinda Translation Company in his report. Or rather, it could be said that it was product placement. After some discussion, Tung Sun agreed not to use the words XX Company to replace the name of Xinda Translation Company. Poplar Fruit did this to return the favor. He did not want to owe others a favor. Yao Dehua had done him a favor, so he had to seize the opportunity to repay him. Tung Sun was not doing a losing business. They had obtained Poplar Fruit's permission to temporarily stay in Poplar Fruit's house and learn more about Poplar Fruit's daily life. Of course, they were not allowed to report many private matters. The reporter who interviewed Poplar Fruit was called Dong Ran. He was not simple. He used to be the head reporter of a newspaper. Later on, he jumped ship to Tung Sun. Dong Runsu was known for his unique vision. Under his digging, the unknown side of Poplar Fruit was peeled off layer by layer like an onion. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 130. Tung Sun News Network's new program had yet to be launched, and Poplar Fruit, who had just sent the reporters away, had yet to enjoy 2 days of peace. Ardal, a French friend he had met in the capital, had come over. When he was in the capital, Poplar Fruit had promised Ardal to be his model and let him design a set of men's fashion. He had not expected Ardal to be so impatient. They had not even been apart for a month, and he had already rushed over from France. Givenchy had his own shop in Yangcheng, and he had also given a house to Ardal to use as a temporary studio. Why was it temporary? When Poplar Fruit arrived, he saw that the studio was too simple and crude. Although the house was a 2-story building in the Creative Technology Park, the interior decoration was simply undecorated. It was a rough house, and the floor was made of rough cement. Although it was not as good as a studio in France, Ardal seemed to like this style quite a lot. In his eyes, an overly luxurious studio would affect his creations, because if his eyes were filled with other people's designs, his mind would not be pure enough. Therefore, when he arrived, he only asked people to arrange for daily necessities on the second floor. The first floor was completely random. The drawings were strewn everywhere, and the various brushes on the table were crooked. He did not clean up at all, and no one dared to do so. When Ardal was at work, he was a geek who flew into a rage. The only compromise Ardal made was to put a huge crib in the studio on the first floor. The crib was so big that Kiki could crawl around and play in it. Even though Poplar Fruit strongly objected, he still asked people to buy a lot of toys for Kiki to play in. Ardal's actions had nothing to do with whether he liked children or not. His original intention was not to please Kiki. He mainly wanted Poplar Fruit to be at ease and cooperate with his work, instead of thinking about his daughter all day long and wanting to go home all day long. This showed how important Poplar Fruit was to Ardal. Poplar Fruit had a lot of questions about this. Isn't it just a model? Why did he act like he cared so much? Poplar Fruit was not a professional model. There were so many excellent models in the world, and there were so many models with Asian faces. Why did Artel favor popular fruits so much? Your temperament is one of a kind, Artel explained to Yang Guo without raising his head while holding the paintbrush in his hand. What Artel liked was popular fruit's youthful and academic temperament. Among them, the most important was academics. As the old saying goes, if you have knowledge, you will naturally be magnificent. When popular fruit came out of school, he did not have such a temperament. It was only after he started to read a lot and gained a lot of knowledge and experience that he developed naturally. There was confidence here, but it was not entirely confidence. There was also a scholarly air and a rich and beautiful complexion. This was a temperament that radiated from the inside out. If one was not an industry leader or a leader in the field, it was impossible to fake it. However, to reach such heights, how many people could have the youthful vitality of poplar fruit? How many people could have the almost perfect figure of poplar fruit? In fact, most of the people who fell in the academic field were crooked, weren't they? Looking for the best among them to be good-looking was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Artel knew that although China was the most developed country in Asia, more and more people had received education. Among them, intellectuals had gradually gained the upper hand. These people were the mainstream consumers of the Asian fashion industry. If one wanted to make good works that would sell well and win awards, the key was to cater to their tastes. There was a strange way of thinking in the fashion industry. They did not consider what kind of fashion the audience wanted. Instead, they told the audience what kind of fashion they should follow through a group of people who were the most knowledgeable about fashion and the most creative new styles. There were pros and cons to this way of thinking. The pros were that they were the ones who truly understood fashion, not the outsiders guiding the insiders. The cons were that it was easy to cause the so-called fashion to be greatly separated from reality. It was like some abstract paintings. How could a work of art that others could not understand be called a work of art? A long time ago, Artel had some ideas. After seeing poplar fruit, his ideas finally took shape. That was to use his own understanding and the potential needs of the market to design a real fashion that belonged to Asia. Yang Guo was very important to Artel because he was the source of Artel's inspiration. At the same time, he also represented a limit. Artel's inspiration couldn't run wild like a wild horse. Everything had to be kept within a limit. But poplar fruit was not very important to Artel because most of the time, Artel sat in front of his big table with a pen in his hand. His eyes were looking at the drawings, but his mind was drifting somewhere else. Poplar fruit was only useful when Artel needed to organize his thoughts and make gestures to design clothes. So, he felt very awkward. He could not go anywhere else, so he could only wait in this house for Artel's call. So, poplar fruit simply moved his own laptop into the house. When Artel needed it, he would stand up and let him play with it. When not needed, poplar fruit would sit next to him, doing his own translation or playing with Kiki. Poplar fruit felt that this kind of cameo was quite strange. When Kiki was there, it was inevitable that she would be a little noisy. She would laugh when she was playing and yell when she was unhappy. There was even one time when poplar fruit took a little longer to go to the bathroom. Kiki, who was playing with her toys, could not find her father and cried loudly. After spending some time with Artel, poplar fruit found that Artel's temper was very strange. Not only was he anxious and irritable, but he was also fussy about many details, but he did not care about trifles in life. But no matter how noisy Kiki was, Artel did not show any impatience. His tolerance for poplar fruit and Kiki was incredible, even to his assistant. But Song Jiwen did not have this kind of treatment. He excitedly waved his phone and ran to poplar fruit. As soon as he entered the house, he yelled, "Lao Guo, you're on fire!" His unrestrained voice immediately attracted the anger of Artel. Artel, who was pulling his hair in annoyance, immediately waved his big broom and used his ultimate move, "I'll chop your face until it's full of peach blossoms." Before Song Jiwen could say another word, he threw him out. Poplar fruit was on fire. After a few days of production, Tung Sun finally released the first episode of A Day in China. A large number of pictures, accompanied by emotional words, depicted the track of Poplar Fruit's day in detail. In fact, his life was very ordinary. But Dong Run's unique vision and the photographer's ingenious angle of shooting vividly reflected Poplar Fruit's self-discipline, gentleness, and love. In this set of pictures, they also prepared content that would interest different audiences. The young couple, who were still struggling to find a house, saw Poplar Fruit carefully raising their daughter, and the child's healthy and happy growth. They understood their expectations for the fruit of their love, and they became more determined and harmonious to build a warm home. The university students, who were muddling along in school day after day, saw Poplar Fruit's difficult life after graduation and after having a child. They understood that happiness could not be obtained simply by daydreaming. They cherished their time more and put in more effort to pursue their own futures. The blue-collar and white-collar workers, who were already working but gradually lost their direction in life, saw Poplar Fruit's unique path and success. They understood that a person must have their own ideals. Perhaps they would also dig out the dreams they once harbored in their memories and take advantage of their youth to give themselves a chance to pursue their dreams. Even more people were able to share Yanggua's happiness from this series of photos. Even if they didn't understand anything, their lives that day had a little more radiance. They would smile at the people around them, even strangers. They would pass on this happiness to others. Of course, the effect that Poplar Fruit wanted was also achieved. Those who were interested in English or translation, regardless of whether they were professionals or not, could all see that Poplar Fruit's high income came from the translation tasks of Cinda Translation Company. Poplar Fruit, a young man who had just left school for more than a year, could earn more than 100,000 yuan a month. Why couldn't they? It was just a name placement, but the advertising effect was already very effective. Because of this news, more and more people started to learn more about Cinda Translation Company. That was enough. Cinda Translation Company was really good. They had a huge market and customer resources, a reasonable and tiered salary system, and an excellent operation team and mentor group. Through Cinda Translation Company's platform, both amateur and professional translators could get what they wanted: training and remuneration. On this platform, as long as you were willing to work hard, you would definitely earn money. Full-time bronze medal translators could earn 4,000 to 8,000 yuan a month, and silver medal translators could earn up to 20,000 to 30,000 yuan a month. As for the gold medal translators, it depends on their capabilities. Normally, 50,000 renminbi a month is the lowest salary for a gold medal translator. For someone like Yanggua, who is very capable and fast at translating, earning 150,000 to 200,000 renminbi a month is not a dream. Therefore, Cinda Translation Company did not lack ability, nor did they lack the conditions to attract translators. It was just that in the big market of the country, they still lacked a little fame, and this time, it was an important opportunity for Yao Dehua to spread out his business. Later on, Yao Dehua also sighed with emotion. It was just a drop of water, but Yanggua had repaid it with a gushing spring and even a gushing tide. This friendship was really worth it. Chapter 131. Poplar Fruit became popular for a while because of the news. Not only did the number of his Weibo fans soar again, but it also showed on his mobile phone. During that time, Poplar Fruit's mobile phone was almost exploding with calls. All kinds of advertisement invitations and interview requests flooded in. Within 2 days, Poplar Fruit had charged his mobile phone 10 times. This was an iPhone with a long standby time. 10 times. It was obvious how frequent the calls were. In the end, Poplar Fruit couldn't stand it anymore. He took out his SIM card and threw it into the sewer. He changed his SIM card and only gave his phone number to his family and friends. Only then did he finally have some peace. He couldn't go home for the time being, so he packed his things early and moved to Ardal's studio. He ate and slept with him. Of course, they shared a different bed. It could be considered as a small support for Ardal's work. During this period of boredom, Poplar Fruit taught Kiki a few new words. This allowed Kiki to learn more expressions. For example, when they were eating, If Poplar Fruit deliberately moved the milk bottle away, Kiki would anxiously say, "Eat, eat, eat," to call back her unscrupulous father's hand. For example, when she wanted something, Kiki would shout, "Yes, yes." Poplar Fruit would often tease her. "What do you want?" Kiki would be so anxious that her little face would twist. There were also other words such as mama ma. Kiki's pronunciation was not very accurate. Uncle, brother, grandpa, and so on. One interesting thing was that Poplar Fruit actually taught Kiki to say grandpa in French. Pear. When Kiki shouted this word in front of Ardal, although it was not accurate enough, Ardal's gloomy face, which had been gloomy for several days, suddenly became as cold as ice in early spring. It was as if the ice melted under the sun, and a smile bloomed on his face again. The reason why Ardal's face had been gloomy for several days was that he had encountered a bottleneck that was difficult to break through. He wanted to make a breakthrough by designing clothes for Poplar Fruit. But after a few days of hard work, he realized that he had taken it for granted. Yes, he did have a lot of inspiration because of the Poplar Fruit, but these inspirations were actually influenced by his artistic education and his own design ideas over the years. They either lacked creativity or were too innovative, but the effect was not satisfactory. Poplar Fruit didn't know much about fashion. He thought that the clothes designed by Ardal were beautiful enough, but Ardal still took the trouble to redo them. Many of the finished clothes were cut by him. It's a bit wasteful. Poplar Fruit sometimes looked at the basket of discarded works and couldn't help but complain in his heart. It didn't matter what Poplar Fruit thought. For an artist, if he wasn't satisfied with his own work, how could he expect others to be satisfied? So Ardal fell into an infinite dilemma. He sat in front of the workbench all day long with his chin in his hands. His white hair was almost pulled out by him. When he was in a bad mood, it would also affect his appetite. When Poplar Fruit first came, he made Chinese food for Ardal several times. Ardal was full of praise and ate without caring about his image. But now he couldn't eat anything. He left in a hurry after eating a few pieces of bread. This state lasted for more than a week. At that time, Ardal began to doubt himself. Can I still design good works? He even had the thought of giving up. It was the magical Kiki that changed him. At that time, Poplar Fruit was holding Kiki on the first floor. He wanted to bring Kiki to Ardal and make him happy. Kiki's arrival also freed Ardal from a large number of manuscripts. The old man stood up and kindly wanted to hold Kiki. Poplar Fruit held Kiki across the table. Because of a moment of carelessness, Kiki's little feet touched the black paint on the table. Then, Kiki's little feet dragged all the way, leaving black spots and thick traces on the white drawing paper. "Oh, I'm sorry." Poplar Fruit was shocked. He picked up Kiki again and hurriedly cleaned up the table for Ardal. In a panic, he apologized to Ardal in Chinese. "Don't move," Ardal suddenly said excitedly. "I'm sorry. I accidentally dirtied your paper. I'll clean it up for you right away." Poplar Fruit finally switched back to French this time. "No, no, no." Ardal protected the paper like a mother hen protecting her chicks. "I think I've got an idea," he said. "Don't make any noise." Poplar Fruit was stunned. He hurriedly carried Kiki to the side. He looked down and saw that Kiki, who was very active, had used her little black feet to draw a few black ink marks on his clothes. Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Well, his clothes were ruined. Ardal was still staring at the drawing paper in a daze. Poplar Fruit carried Kiki to the bathroom to wash off the paint that was still on her feet. Poplar Fruit anxiously walked out with Kiki in his arms. Suddenly, a black shadow rushed over. Poplar Fruit couldn't help but want to throw the shadow away with Tai Chi. Fortunately, he saw clearly that it was Ardal. Ardal happily ran up to Chi-Chi and kissed her on the cheek. He held Poplar Fruit's empty right hand and said happily, "I've figured it out. I've figured it out." As he said that, he dragged Poplar Fruit to the front of the workbench and pointed at the drawing paper to show it to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit calmly pulled his right hand out and carefully looked at the drawing paper that Kiki had just ruined. The black marks were still there, but they weren't as messy as before. Ardal must have added some dots and new marks. Just like the finishing touch, the drawing had become very beautiful. Poplar Fruit didn't know what was so beautiful about the drawing. He only felt that the pattern formed by the combination of black dots and lines exuded a generous and elegant charm. This, Chi-Chi squeaked. This was her way of showing her father what she was doing. Kiki pointed at the drawing proudly, as if she was telling her father that it was her masterpiece. Poplar Fruit ignored her. He smiled at Artel and said, "Congratulations, Artel. I think you found the feeling of this design." Artel laughed and said, "No, I have to thank Luo Chi." Kiki's nickname was very awkward in his pronunciation, so he called her by her name. "She gave me the inspiration." It turns out that ink painting style is the best way to show the temperament of a scholar. This was just a sketch, and the real design had just begun. However, with a breakthrough, Artel progressed very quickly. It only took 4 days for the design of the clothes to basically take shape. Poplar Fruit's fitting also made Artel very satisfied. Poplar Fruit didn't mind the trouble. He went to Yangcheng to take a few sets of street photos for Artel. He also took a lot of photos for the promotional material of the clothes in the future. This time, the cooperation between the two lasted until the middle of December. Chapter 132. There was no need to discuss whether Poplar Fruit was a blockhead or not. Perhaps it was because he spent too much time on Kiki that he became very slow when it came to relationships. Don't worry too much. He has always been like this. Love just needs to wait patiently, and everything will come naturally. Duan Xueqing thought in her heart. Sometimes, she would imagine a happy future with Poplar Fruit. In Duan Xueqing's imagination, there was the most romantic wedding there. It was every girl's dream to have a beautiful wedding. In this aspect, Duan Xueqing had a unique advantage. Because she had money, she didn't need Poplar Fruit to work hard to make money. With her private money, it was enough for her to book the beautiful Bali Island. In her imagination, she was wearing a white feather wedding dress, and Poplar Fruit was wearing a handsome suit. Poplar Fruit was holding her hand, and the two of them slowly walked across the wooden bridge covered with a red carpet. Next to them, their friends and relatives were driving boats, rippling on the crystal-clear sea, and scattering red rose petals along the bridge. At the end of the bridge, in the middle of the sea, there was a beautiful artificial island. Her dear father and mother were standing there to welcome them. There was also an amiable priest who would read the vows to Poplar Fruit and her under the arch full of white lilies, and all the relatives and friends present would witness and bless their happiness. Duan Xueqing would also imagine their future life, which must be full of sweetness of love. Yes, they didn't need to be spectacular, they didn't need the attention of the world, and they didn't need to have a great career. As long as the two of them could hold hands and grow old together, that would be enough. Their life must be full of poetry. In the morning, she was woken up by a kiss from her husband. For breakfast, it was porridge that he cooked with love. Work was counting the time and waiting to see him as soon as possible. When she came home from work, she was hugged by a big hug and a hug that she could talk about her hard work. Dinner was a romantic candlelight dinner. Taking a stroll was holding hands under the starry sky. In the last night, it was the shyness of love. It must be such a wonderful thing to be with the person you love. Duan Xueqing only needed to imagine a little bit to fill her heart with sweetness and brighten her mood. Everything she saw was blissful. Therefore, even if Poplar Fruit didn't understand her feelings for the time being, it didn't matter. She was willing to continue waiting until the moment she could hug him. Duan Xueqing was like a princess in the Duan family. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was the bright moon surrounded by stars. Her world was as simple as a fairy tale. However, was love really something that could be waited for? Perhaps this was the case in the beautiful fairy tale world. After dinner, it was almost time for Duan Xueqing to go home. Winter nights were not like summer nights. At night, the cold wind whistled outside. Other than those who had to work hard to run small businesses, there was almost no one on the streets. It was empty, and the whole world was like the end of the world. Poplar Fruit put the sleeping Kiki in the crib, put on his coat, and sent Duan Xueqing to the entrance of the neighborhood to take a taxi. After getting out of the elevator and walking downstairs, Duan Shueching pointed at a few bedboards piled up downstairs and said to Poplar Fruit, "What's wrong with this?" Poplar Fruit looked at it and smiled. "Oh, this. I heard that a tenant on the third floor is not living there recently. He's been moving these days." He casually touched the dismantled bedboard. It seemed to be new. Then he scratched his head and said, "It seems to be new. Could it be that it doesn't belong to that tenant?" Duan Shueching stood quietly at the side, her hands tucked into her cute pink bunny gloves. The reason why she said tucked was because this pair of cotton gloves was connected to a long cotton string, hanging down from her neck like two small pockets. Poplar Fruit continued his analysis. "It should be a new one from the property management. He'll change it when he moves out. The property management here is pretty good. They don't use things that others have used to fool people. When I came over, the bedboards were all new. Of course, it was good. This was a high-end apartment building. The rent was 1 or 2,000 yuan more expensive than ordinary houses outside. If the service was not good, would people still come to rent it? One had to know that those who could afford to rent here were not poor people. What they wanted was a more comfortable environment. Isn't it much better than the place you're living in now?" Poplar Fruit looked at Duan Shueching and laughed. Duan Shueching nodded her head lightly and answered simply. Poplar Fruit walked with her and said, "The property management in the neighborhood you're living in now is self-managed. Those uncles and aunties look good, but in terms of business model, they're much worse than professional property management companies. But it doesn't matter. Think about it. You only have a few dozen yuan a month in property management. But if the neighborhood can be clean, the street lights, security, and so on are okay, that's enough, right?" Poplar Fruit talked a lot. When he stopped for a moment, Duan Shueching suddenly stopped and said softly, "This place is really good." Yangwu didn't know why Duan Shueching was standing there. She turned around and saw that under Duan Shueching's neat bangs, a pair of beautiful eyes were shining in the dark night sky, as if there was some kind of emotion flowing within them. "How about I rent it too?" Duan Shueching hesitated and asked tentatively. Although Duan Shueching's words were very vague, Poplar Fruit still understood. Duan Shueching meant that she also wanted to rent a place with such a good environment. "Okay." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "If you rent it, we'll be close and we can take care of each other. Moreover, if you come over, we can even work together. Look at that guy Song Jiwen. He comes over every day to eat and drink. Look at how fat he is." Feeling that this example was not right, he added, "I'm not saying that you can eat and drink. I think that eating together is also a very happy thing." Duan Shueching nodded seriously. She was so happy that her eyes curved. In fact, eating was only one aspect. Duan Shueching hoped that after moving over, she could be closer to Poplar Fruit. She did not have to see him every once in a while, and she did not have to rely on Poplar Fruit's warm smile to get through the cold winter. Poplar Fruit waved his fist and said with a smile, "But the rent here is not cheap. If you want to rent a place here, you really have to work hard and earn more money." The night wind was getting stronger and stronger. Duan Shueching's hair fluttered in the wind, and her face was red from the cold. She did not hear what Poplar Fruit said at the end and just nodded. The weather was getting colder and colder. Poplar Fruit waved at Duan Shueching and asked her to hurry up. Duan Shueching covered the scarf around her neck and quickly followed Poplar Fruit. "When can I be held by him, or even hugged? That way, no matter how strong the wind is, no matter how cold the night is, it will not be scary." Chapter 133. After Duan Shueching went back, she really started asking about the rent of the apartment. Poplar Fruit's apartment was still in short supply. Since there were people moving out now, if possible, they wanted to quickly get a place. Before the Chinese New Year, Duan Shueching was a little busy at work. If she moved there before then, she wouldn't have time to adapt to the changes. It wasn't realistic, but she wanted to occupy a place first. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any place left in the future. Duan Shueching had signed a 1-year contract with the old house. It was still a long time before the contract expired. However, she didn't care about the deposit of a few thousand yuan. She also didn't care about the rent that would be wasted temporarily. After all, Duan Xueqing was a little rich woman. She still had a huge sum of money in her hands. After Duan Xueqing's mother went back last time, she couldn't help but come over again. She felt sorry for her daughter, so she gave her daughter 2 million yuan in pocket money and told her to rent a better apartment and buy a car and clothes for herself. Mother Duan felt that as the little princess of a rich family, it was fine if Duan Xueqing didn't squander money, but how could she be so thrifty and strict with herself? If the old folks in her hometown found out about this, they might criticize her behind her back. They might say that the Duan family favored boys over girls and didn't treat their daughter as a human. Poplar Fruit didn't know what Duan Xueqing was thinking. He thought that Duan Xueqing was just saying it casually. How long had it been since Duan Xueqing graduated? Even if she was a civil servant, it would be impossible for her to live in a high-end apartment that cost a few thousand yuan a month in less than half a year. She wasn't like Song Jiwen, who was the second generation of a government official. Her family didn't give her money to support her. He didn't know that Duan Xueqing wasn't the second generation of a government official, but she was a rich second generation who was richer than the second generation of a government official. Song Jiwen only had a little bit of money, but Duan Xueqing was the real deal. The pocket money her family gave her every year was enough to buy a house in Yangcheng. In any case, Poplar Fruit didn't pay too much attention to the development of this matter. He was actually very busy. Although he was a freelancer, there were still a lot of miscellaneous matters. As soon as he brought Kiki to the hospital for a checkup, Zheng Yujie called him. Little Guozi, just as the phone was placed next to her ear, Zheng Yujie's long and sweet voice sounded from the speaker. Big Sister has been busy these past few days. If I don't call you, you won't call Big Sister? I'm so sad. After returning from Beijing, Zheng Yujie called Poplar Fruit more often. She called Poplar Fruit almost every 1 or 2 days. The reason was that she wanted to keep in touch with Poplar Fruit, who was a powerful translator. As for the content of the call, it was never about this topic. Zheng Yujie would tell Poplar Fruit about all the interesting things that happened to her in the past few days. Life, work, and even what she saw on the news became the topic of conversation between her and Poplar Fruit. Zheng Yujie's ability to chat was much better than Duan Xueqing's. Duan Xueqing was very cold and didn't like to chat for long periods of time. She would even use words like and "ol" to replace the actual content of her answers. So sometimes, Poplar Fruit and her chat would turn into staring at each other. Duan Xueqing liked this feeling, but Poplar Fruit didn't care. Zheng Yujie was different. This Beijing girl also had the characteristics of Beijing people who were particularly talkative. She talked endlessly, but she also paid attention to other people's feelings. So when Poplar Fruit talked to her on the phone for almost an hour, he didn't feel impatient at all. The onlooker sees more clearly than the person involved. Poplar Fruit didn't feel anything special. He treated Zheng Yujie with the attitude of a friend. But if there was a third person listening to them, they would be amazed at the wonderful relationship between the two of them. They were one step closer than friends, but they were still far away from being lovers. Maybe if Zheng Yujie didn't take the initiative, they might not even be able to take this step. However, Zheng Yujie's sweet tone really gave Poplar Fruit goosebumps. In Poplar Fruit's impression, she had always been a short-haired, capable, and straightforward queen. Now it seemed that this queen was also a changeable queen. Please speak human language, Miss Zheng Yujie. After the two of them became familiar with each other, Poplar Fruit talked to her quite casually. Humph! Zheng Yujie snorted lazily to express her dissatisfaction. Her voice was so languid that Poplar Fruit could imagine her curling up in the warm quilt and pouting. I need you to help me with some ideas. Zheng Yujie changed back to her normal tone. Poplar Fruit asked curiously, what ideas? He thought for a moment and then said, is it about the book import report you mentioned a few days ago? Zheng Yujie told him that at the end of the year, Dongxin Publishing not only had to do the annual summary and take stock of the publishing and income of the publishing house for the year, but also start to prepare the publishing plan for the next year. For Dongxin Publishing, the import of foreign books was the most important, And the book import report at the end of the year was also very important, which was related to the income of the next year. Although it was just a plan, and the decision was still in the hands of the chief editor and the president, every deputy chief editor needed to discuss a series of books with their subordinates, and Zheng Yujie, the new deputy chief editor, was no exception. Yes, this plan is driving me crazy, Zheng Yujie said helplessly. She didn't pretend in front of Poplar Fruit like before. Poplar Fruit didn't care, so she was more willing to be herself. You want me to recommend a few books for you? Poplar Fruit said with a headache. I don't understand the operation of the publishing house, and my suggestions are not as good as your colleagues. Who said that I need your recommendations? My plan is almost finished. Zheng Yujie said. Now I just need a book to be the main title. I have an idea about this, but I am worried that this book won't sell well. I just want you to give me some advice. What book? Poplar Fruit asked curiously. Teenage Pie's Fantasy Drift. Zheng Yujie said. Oh, it's this book. Poplar Fruit said suddenly. Have you read it? Zheng Yujie asked curiously. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. I haven't read it, but I have heard about it. Of course, he had heard about it. Poplar Fruit didn't read every foreign book, but in order to understand the current situation of foreign books and some classic works, he still read a lot of publishing reports. With his memory, of course, he could still remember this foreign language book that had appeared repeatedly in many media outlets. 8 or 9 years ago, this book was very popular abroad. Poplar Fruit explained. Not only that, this book also won a lot of important awards, such as the 2002 Booker Prize in England, the 2002 Best Book on Amazon.com, the Big Apple Times Outstanding Book of the Year, Publishers Weekly's Best Book of the Year, Rocky Mountain Times Best Novel of the Year, and in 2004 it won the German Book Award. That's not right. Poplar Fruit asked doubtfully. This book has been famous for so long. How could it not be published by a domestic publishing house? Zheng Yujie said with a wry smile. Yes, Yilin Publishing House has introduced this book before, but it didn't sell well, and the results were not ideal. Until now, only one edition has been published. That's possible. Poplar Fruit analyzed for Zheng Yujie. Not every book suits the taste of our people. This book seems to be a bit of an absurd fantasy story, and domestic readers may not be able to accept it. Well, that's true, Zheng Yujie said. I chose this book mainly because a few days ago, I got a message through a private channel. She paused and asked, Do you know Li Yin, the director of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? Of course, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. How could I not know? He's the best director in the Chinese community. A few years ago, he won the Oscar for Best Director for Brokeback Mountain. He's preparing to make a movie based on this book. Zheng Yujie suddenly threw out a big piece of information. Don't tell anyone. This matter is still being kept a secret. Lian is going to make a movie about a young PI's fantasy? Poplar Fruit said in surprise. Then this book is different. Yes, no matter how the book sales were before, Li An's movie will increase its sales. Zheng Yujie said. However, if we only borrow Li An's influence, it can't become our main book. Moreover, there's no way for me to persuade the editor-in-chief to trade back the publishing rights of this book. You want to ask my opinion? Poplar Fruit asked. Yes. Zheng Yujie was lying on the big bed in her house in Beijing. She crossed her legs and said, I sent you a book written by the original author and a translator. Take a look. If I translate it for you, can you make this book so popular that everyone wants to read it? Everyone wants to buy it. There are so many publishers and translators in Beijing. Why did you come all the way to find me to give you an idea? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Because you're handsome, Zheng Yujie said casually. Ah? Okay. I'll stop teasing you, Zheng Yujie said seriously. I haven't told anyone about this. There are so many people, but you're the one I trust the most, so I came to you. Why? Are you still not willing to help? The one I trust the most, Poplar Fruit was inexplicably touched. He froze for a moment, then smiled gently and said, Sister Yujie thinks so highly of you. Of course, I'm willing to help. Don't worry, I'll definitely take good care of it for you. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, Zheng Yujie said. It's not that I have to choose Teenage Pie's Fantasy Drifting as my main book. It's just that it's a rare opportunity to catch up with Lian to make a movie about this book. Zheng Yujia said, if we can make this book that has been banished into the cold palace a bestseller again, it'll be a good result for us. But if this book can't be saved and you decide that it's not our country's cup of tea, then it doesn't matter. I can continue to look for it. Zheng Yujia laughed. It's not a big deal, right? She also wittily used the classic lines that she said on the Spring Festival Gala in Shenyang 2 years ago. Poplar Fruit was amused by her imitation of a strong northeastern accent. After a long time, he stopped and said, okay, I'll help you take a look. You also take care of your body. Don't work too hard. Before hanging up the phone, Poplar Fruit finally warned Zheng Yujia. There was a beep-beep sound from the phone. Zheng Yujia held the phone in front of her chest and didn't put it down for a long time. Chapter 134. In the blink of an eye, it was already the end of 2011. Kiki was almost 8 months old. Thinking back to the time when she was a wrinkled baby, under the care of her father, Poplar Fruit, she had grown into a little girl who could crawl and talk. Chi-Chi loved to smile, and when she smiled, her 2 front teeth were exposed. Her white teeth were very dazzling, and Yang Guo was very satisfied. Every day, she thought that when she grew a little older, she could find a way to make delicious food for Chi-Chi. Today was the 22nd of December, Kiki's first winter solstice. In the past, Poplar Fruit would go to Song Jiwen's house for a meal. This year he couldn't, because there was an old man in his family who was sick. Song Jiwen and his family went back to their hometown to visit. Therefore, they didn't come back to Yangcheng for the winter solstice. Poplar Fruit originally planned to cook something simple for himself. This winter solstice wasn't a big deal. However, when Poplar Fruit came back from his morning exercise, he received a call from his big brother, He Wenjue. Brother Yang? He Wenjue's rough voice came from the phone. How is it? Do you have any plans for the winter solstice? After returning from his hometown, He Wenjue might have been out on a mission and didn't have time to contact him. More than a week ago, he wanted to invite Poplar Fruit to his house. However, Poplar Fruit was worried about Kiki's cold and didn't want to take her out, so he declined. Big brother He, are you guys off today? Poplar Fruit laughed. I'm all alone in Yangcheng. How could I have any plans? How's the child's cold? How is it? Do you want to come over for a meal? Your sister-in-law is cooking today. Yuanjua said, that's great. I haven't been to Big Brother's house yet, so I'll go over for a meal today, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Kiki's cold is already recovered. Tell me the address, and I'll go over now. No, it's troublesome to take a taxi. I'll drive over to pick you up. He Wenjue arranged everything for Poplar Fruit without any explanation. As soon as he finished speaking, he hung up the phone. Poplar Fruit shook his head. He didn't know what to do with his straightforward brother. He packed up Kiki's things and put them in a small bag. Kiki was also dressed neatly. She was wearing a more fashionable one-piece cow coat. Even the hat was connected. Kiki looked like she was in a sleeping bag. Poplar Fruit was still worried, so he wrapped the straps with a small quilt. Kiki was wrapped up tightly, and only her 2 big eyes could be seen rolling around. When He Wenjue arrived, Poplar Fruit carried the small bag and went downstairs. He Wenjue's car was a Land Rover Range Rover with a military license plate. It looked like He Wenjue's character. It was domineering but calm, rough but stylish. When he drove, the sound of the car was like a tiger's roar. It was majestic. Many women didn't like Land Rovers. In their eyes, such a car without a beautiful curve was ugly. This was normal. What did women like? Jewelry, cosmetics, beautiful clothes. These were all small, exquisite, and colorful. Men, on the other hand, were born with the smell of machinery in their bones. They liked guns and machines. An off-road vehicle like the Land Rover was made for men. They were dynamic, full of momentum, and very sensitive to control. They could satisfy men's desire for power. Yangguo also fell in love with the Land Rover at first sight. Perhaps it was because he had stayed in the city for too long. He longed to be able to drive such a car. It was like riding a wild horse, galloping through the grassland. Even if he couldn't drive it, to be able to drive such a huge car was also a great pleasure for a man. When Kiki grows up, I'll buy a Land Rover too. Poplar Fruit got in the car and touched it enviously. He secretly made up his mind. Poplar Fruit could still afford a Land Rover. A brand new Land Rover Range Rover was only 600,000 yuan. If it was a sports version, it would be a little more than 1,000,000 yuan. Poplar Fruit's 2 months of translation fees and the money from Artel were about 1,200,000 yuan. If Kiki wasn't too young and couldn't take care of her while driving, Poplar Fruit would definitely buy one. When they arrived at He Wenjua's house, Poplar Fruit realized that his brother was so rich. He lived in the villa area of Dongshan Mountain, a 2-story red brick villa with a garden. When the car stopped at the door, Poplar Fruit felt a sense of elegance and wealth. Big Brother said that he was the captain of a special force in Yangcheng's military. His rank shouldn't be too high. At most, he should be a colonel, right? Poplar Fruit muttered in his heart. He didn't know much about military ranks, so he was just guessing. But no matter what his rank is, how could he be rich enough to drive a nice car and live in a luxurious house? Could it be that there's some corruption involved? He Wenjua seemed to have seen through Poplar Fruit's thoughts. He laughed heartily and said, "This house was assigned to my father by the country. He's not at home today. Come in, let me introduce you." Poplar Fruit scratched his head awkwardly and followed He Wenjua into the yard. Ring, ring, ring. A large wolf dog with a bell around its neck ran briskly to He Wenjua's side. It rubbed its head against He Wenjua's thigh. It was affectionate with He Wenjua while vigilantly looking at Poplar Fruit. Unlike other dogs, its eyes were very sharp, but it didn't bark to scare people. "This is Big Black." He Wenjua squatted down and affectionately pulled the corner of its mouth back. "He's a meritorious military dog in our army. He just retired at the beginning of this year." He Wenjua let Big Black sniff Poplar Fruit's scent and smiled. "Don't be afraid. Big Black is very smart. He knows that you're a guest." After that, he let Big Black go back to its little nest. At this time, a woman who was about the same age as He Wenjua came out of the garden. She was wearing a straw hat and carrying a dirty, empty bucket. If it weren't for the quiet and elegant temperament on her face, Poplar Fruit would have thought that she was a rural woman. "Is this Poplar Fruit?" She walked out with the help of a tree and looked at Poplar Fruit and He Wenjua with a smile. "Yes." He Wenjua laughed, grabbed the bucket from her hand, and said, "Poplar Fruit, this is your sister-in-law, Ji Xiaoyan." Ji as in Jizhou, Xiao as in spring sleep, the yin as in flying south, Ji Xiaoyan added. "Hello, sister-in-law." Poplar Fruit quickly greeted her. "You don't have to be so polite." Ji Xiaoyan's personality was very gentle. Her voice wasn't as rough as He Wenjua's. Instead, it had a hint of southern grace, although her accent sounded more like a northeasterner. She then said, "Wenjua has mentioned you to me many times. I heard that if it weren't for you last time, Wenjua would have died. I really don't know how to thank you." Poplar Fruit shook his hand and said, No. In that kind of dangerous situation, Big Brother, he and I advanced and retreated together. There's no need to talk about who saved who." "Hey, don't talk outside. It's cold. Don't let the children catch a cold. Come in, come in." He Wenjua smiled. He opened his arms and walked into the house with Poplar Fruit and Ji Xiaoyan. "Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to." Chapter 135. When they entered the house, the temperature rose a lot. He Wenjua's house didn't have an electric heater like Poplar Fruit's, but it seemed that the decoration of the house made the insulation function good. There was no cold wind sneaking in through the window cracks, and the room temperature in the house was maintained at 12 or 20 degrees. Poplar Fruit didn't dare to let Kiki take off her outer cotton-padded jacket like at home. Poplar Fruit only untied the small quilt and removed the straps so that Kiki could stretch her hands and feet. Kiki, who was wearing a cute black and white cow onesie, attracted Ji Xiaoyan's attention. She wanted to tease Kiki, But then she remembered that she was still covered in mud and grass. You go and tidy up first. He Wenjua patted Ji Xiaoyan's back and laughed heartily. Sister-in-law went to the bathroom at the back, and Poplar Fruit was led by He Wenjua to visit the house. Compared to the luxurious appearance of the house outside, the decoration and display of the furniture in the house were relatively simple. In the living room, there was a square table in the middle, 2 armchairs on both sides, and the coffee table and sofa next to it were all made of pure wood. There wasn't even a cushion on the sofa. There were 2 floors. The first floor was the living room, kitchen, bathroom, and a spacious and bright study. The area was very large, but there was no bedroom. The second floor was all bedrooms. 1 main bedroom and 4 main bedrooms. The area of each bedroom was not small. Such a design was actually quite unreasonable for a modern house. However, if the owner of the house needed to meet important guests often, then the design of the first floor could highlight his temperament. When visiting the study, Poplar Fruit finally understood what He Wenjua meant when he said at the door, "The country assigned this to my father." "This Mr. He Jioming is your father?" Poplar Fruit pointed to the words "Iron Blood Loyal Heart" mounted on the top of the study, and the name He Jioming was signed below. Many people might not be familiar with He Jioming, and there were not many news reports about him. Poplar Fruit had only seen him in a newspaper, but that did not prevent him from remembering that He Jioming was a high-ranking member of the Standing Committee of the Provincial Party Committee. These are purely fictional. He Wenjua smiled and said, "You already know before I tell you?" "Yes, he is my father." That made sense, to be able to be allocated such a good house. However, He Wenjua patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder, looked into his eyes, and said solemnly, "My father is my father, and I am me. I earned all the merits by risking my life. I didn't tell you before because I don't want you to misunderstand." He Wenjua also took off his long-sleeved shirt, revealing his scars. Poplar Fruit saw several scars on his strong muscles, as well as a few round scars. "These are all bullet bites." He Wenjua pointed to a scar on his chest and said, 3 years ago, I was shot here. It was less than a centimeter away from my heart, and it almost took me away." Poplar Fruit turned around and saw Ji Xiaoyan standing at the door with tears in her eyes. He Wenjua also saw her. He quickly put on his shirt, walked to his wife, put his arm around her shoulder and said, "It's okay, it's okay. It's all in the past." "Then why are you bragging so much?" Ji Xiaoyan patted his chest hard. She was less than 1.65 meters, and He Wenjua was more than 1.9 meters, a little taller than Poplar Fruit. When the two of them stood together, it was like a beauty and a beast. Ji Xiaoyan could barely reach He Wenjua's chest. Okay. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have said it." He Wenjua didn't have his usual valiant spirit. He was like an ordinary man who had made a mistake, saying good things to his wife and begging for forgiveness. Back in the living room, Poplar Fruit was quick-witted. He hugged Kiki to his chest, waved Kiki's little hand, and whispered in her ear, "Kiki, call Annie, Annie." Kiki had learned this word before. Zheng Yujia had forced Poplar Fruit to teach Kiki over the phone. She had said it many times. Hearing her father's instructions, Kiki looked at Ji Xiaoyan. Her eyes rolled, and she said crisply, "Hey, Annie, he." Her pronunciation became clearer and clearer, and she even opened her mouth and smiled proudly. Ji Xiaoyan was stunned for a moment. Her tears turned into laughter. She reached out and took Kiki. Kiki was in her arms. Her hat fell off, and she put it on Kiki. "Baby, you're so good, so smart." Ji Xiaoyan's face rubbed against Kiki's little face, and she praised her. Kiki felt that the person in front of her was praising her. Flowers bloomed in her heart. She beamed, and her 2 white front teeth were exposed. In order to whiten his daughter's teeth, Poplar Fruit had put in a lot of effort. At night, after Kiki fell asleep, he would use a small cotton swab dipped in water for Kiki to brush her teeth. Every time after drinking milk or eating, Poplar Fruit would feed Kiki some warm water to rinse her mouth. "Poplar Fruit, how old is the baby?" Ji Xiaoyan asked lovingly. Kiki was born at the end of April this year. She's 8 months old now. Poplar Fruit smiled. 8 months? Ji Xiaoyan asked in surprise. Kiki? Kiki is really smart. She's so pretty. Look at her big eyes and small nose bridge. She must have inherited all the good points from you and your wife. Oh, right, poplar fruit. Why didn't you bring your wife over to play today? Ah. He Wenjue, who was sitting next to them and didn't talk much, awkwardly pulled Ji Xiaoyan's hand. What's wrong? Ji Xiaoyan asked, puzzled. He Wenjue looked at poplar fruit, wanting to say something, but stopped. It's okay. Poplar fruit smiled and said, Kiki's mother passed away when she gave birth to her. Ji Xiaoyan didn't know how many times she had been surprised today. She covered her mouth and said regretfully, Oh, I'm really sorry. I mentioned something that hurt you. It's really nothing. Poplar fruit smiled. It's all in the past. Don't worry too much about it. Although he Wenjue looked like a burly man, his mind was still very meticulous. He laughed and started to change the topic. Yinzi, take a guess. What does this brother of mine do? Don't you think he looks a little familiar? What does he do? Ji Xiaoyan asked doubtfully. He looks a little familiar. Is he a celebrity? No. Poplar Fruit smiled and shook his head. He knew that He Wenjue had seen his report on Tung Sun's news, but Ji Xiaoyan probably didn't hear him mention it. He Wenjue said, Actually, I showed it to you, but I didn't specifically say it was poplar fruit. Oh. Ji Xiaoyan finally remembered such an obvious hint. That translator. I remember now. Tung Sun's one-day program. I was wondering why you showed me the news out of the blue that day. Ji Xiaoyan pushed him angrily. He Wenjue exaggeratedly fell on the sofa with his limbs in the air. Ji Xiaoyan quickly avoided him and smiled. Put away your fast legs. Don't tease the child. As the conversation went deeper, Poplar Fruit found out that Ji Xiaoyan was a primary school teacher. No wonder her personality was so gentle and demure, and she was so patient when she hugged Kiki. Although it was the winter solstice, school still went on as usual. Ji Xiaoyan didn't have class today, but He Wenjue and her child were still in school. So Ji Xiaoyan sat for a while and drove to pick up the child. He Wenjue looked at Poplar Fruit with a smile and said, How is it, brother? You can't tell, right? Your brother's child can already play soy sauce. He Wenjue was 29 years old this year, but his son, He Yuchen, was already more than 7 years old. Wasn't that the same as him? He had a child at the age of 22. My situation with your sister-in-law is a little special. I went to the army very early and married her very early. He Wenjue explained simply. He Wenjue didn't say that he and Ji Xiaoyan were actually in a political marriage. However, he was relatively lucky. The woman that his family arranged for him was the type of wife and mother. After marriage, the two of them went from treating each other respectfully to helping each other in times of need, and their relationship grew deeper and deeper. He Wenjue was born in a military family. When he graduated from high school at the age of 18, he was thrown into military school. He studied while serving as a soldier, and at that time, he was basically considered a soldier. It was completely different from the leisurely life of a university student. He and Ji Xiaoyan registered their marriage the moment they reached the age of 22. Before that, the two of them accidentally got pregnant. So their child was born very early and was now in the second grade of primary school. His wife wasn't there. So He Wenjue looked at Poplar Fruit and rubbed his palms together, looking like he couldn't hold back his thirst. Brother, last time in your hometown, I didn't seriously spar with you. How about it? Let's spar today. He Wenjue licked his lips and said eagerly. Now, Poplar Fruit said somewhat awkwardly. Then who's going to take care of Kiki? You just let her lie on the armchair. He Wenjue said, We'll just keep an eye on her. That won't do. Kiki can now climb. If she's not careful, she'll fall down. Poplar Fruit shook his head like a rattledrum. He Wenjue wouldn't let go of this opportunity. He rolled his eyes and came up with an idea. He ran up the stairs and then jumped down quickly with a long piece of cloth in his hand. He pulled up an armchair. Poplar Fruit didn't understand how he gestured, but soon he used the cloth to form a dam around the armchair, blocking the front of the armchair. Come, carry her in. He Wenjue excitedly waved at Poplar Fruit. All right, Poplar Fruit couldn't persuade him, so he carried Kiki over. His hands were actually itching. Practicing martial arts every day. How could it compare to a real battle? Kiki was carried into the armchair by her father. She didn't cry, but she curiously looked around the place where she was sitting. She even reached out her small hand to touch the cloth around her. She felt that this side was different from the other three sides. She was very curious. Poplar Fruit and Hiwunjua took off their shirts and stood in the middle of the living room. The two of them stared at each other, ready to fight at any moment. Kiki looked out from the gap in the cloth and saw her father and the big uncle confronting each other. She didn't move. Her eyes were wide open, and her small mouth was open. She seemed very nervous. Chapter 136. Kiki stared fixedly at her father. She looked a little nervous, and her little hands squeezed the tight cloth into a thin rope. Poplar Fruit stared at Hiwunjua with full concentration. In a fight, there was no distinction between brothers, only skill. He didn't have enough combat experience, so he didn't dare to be negligent. His breathing slowed down, and the muscles on his body tensed up slightly. He took a half-squat, half-stride stance, and gently rose and fell according to the frequency of his breathing. Hiwunjua didn't dare to relax at all. He knew that Poplar Fruit was strong. He didn't know where his martial arts came from, but he wasn't inferior to the fighting experts in their army. Even if it was just a spar, he had to use 200% of his strength to deal with him. After going around in circles, the two were still facing each other. Poplar Fruit was good at maintaining his composure. Hiwunjua's martial arts were learned in the army, so he was a little impatient. He quickly couldn't hold it in. The muscles on his right arm suddenly bulged, as if it had swelled up, and he threw a powerful punch at Poplar Fruit. Hiwunjua was tall and strong. Even if he wasn't trained, a normal person wouldn't be able to take a punch. Moreover, he was a well-trained Special Forces soldier. Poplar Fruit didn't dare to take Hiwunjua's punch head-on. He changed his pace, twisted his body, and dodged Hiwunjua's punch. Then, Poplar Fruit pressed down on his left fist, and while Hiwunjua was still unbalanced, he bent down and scooped him up. Hiwunjua lost his balance and was thrown to the ground by Poplar Fruit. Although there was a lot of information written on it, everything happened in the blink of an eye. Poplar Fruit's reaction was much better than Hiwunjua's. Hiwunjua didn't have a chance to react to many of his moves. This time, Poplar Fruit didn't use any special moves. He relied purely on his reaction and strength to win. Even if many people were skilled, they might not be able to flip Hiwunjua over. After all, he was a big man who weighed almost 200 pounds. Hiwunjua fell to the ground, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He thought that even if he wasn't a match for Poplar Fruit, he could at least test Poplar Fruit's strength. But after this fight, he found that he was still no match for Poplar Fruit. This was too shocking. Poplar Fruit reached out and pulled Hiwunjua up. After Hiwunjua stood up, he looked at Poplar Fruit and said in surprise, "Brother, you're very strong too. How much strength did you use to pull me up?" Poplar Fruit scratched his head embarrassedly and said, "About 80%. In fact, he was still being modest. Hiwunjua also stood up just now, and Poplar Fruit didn't use more than 60% of his strength. It wasn't good to be too ostentatious. Hiwunjua was convinced this time. He patted Poplar Fruit's arm, which didn't ripple much, and said enviously, "I really don't know how you train. You don't show off, but you're still so strong. Next time, do you want to come to my barracks to take a look?" Hiwunjua's eyes lit up and said, "You can go and play with my group of kids who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Let them understand that there are mountains beyond mountains and people beyond people. Also, I have a lot of fun and exciting things at my place." Hiwunjua laughed. "What's exciting?" Ji Xiaoyan's voice came from the door. "Dad!" Before the person arrived, the voice came first. A dignified little boy rushed in from the door and threw himself on Hiwunjua's thigh. Son, you're back?" Hiwunjua bent down, his large hands clamped onto his son's shoulders, and threw him up forcefully. Chen was thrown into the air, but he wasn't afraid. He laughed loudly in the air. his laughter drawing a parabola in the air. When he rose to the highest point, He Wenjua stretched out his right arm and easily clamped He Yuchen's legs. He Yuchen's body turned around and sat on He Wenjua's broad shoulders. "Dad!" Kiki also heard He Yuchen's voice. She also shouted loudly from the armchair. She also wanted her father to hug her. At this time, He Wenjua explained to Ji Xiaoyan, who was standing at the door with a small school bag, "No, I just told Poplar Fruit to come to my barracks to play. Don't bully Poplar Fruit." Ji Xiaoyan put down her school bag and said, "Poplar Fruit is so thin and weak. He's not like you. His skin is rough and his flesh is thick. No matter how much you toss around, it'll be fine." He Wenjua didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, "I bully him? Yanzi, you underestimate Poplar Fruit too much. With his strength, I'm already thankful that he doesn't bully me. I fought with him just now and was defeated in one move." "You fought at home?" Ji Xiaoyan's focus was obviously different from He Wenjua's. She frowned and reached out her right hand to He Wenjua's waist, pretending to twist it. Don't. Honey, our son is here. It doesn't matter if you hurt me, but don't drop our son." He Wenjua used his son as a shield. Ji Xiaoyan snorted and said to Poplar Fruit, "Poplar Fruit, don't be like your big brother. He's a rough person. Let's not argue with him." He Wenjua stood behind Ji Xiaoyan and winked. Poplar Fruit found it funny and nodded to Ji Xiaoyan. Dinner was very sumptuous. The dumplings were made by Ji Xiaoyan at noon. She also made chicken soup and white-cut chicken. The other dishes were also delicious. Poplar Fruit couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This sister-in-law was really a good wife and mother. She was even so good at cooking. He Yuchen looked like his father. He had strong bones. At the age of 7, he was already more than 3 meters tall. He Wenjua didn't spoil this son of his. At a young age, he cultivated the good habit of eating and washing dishes by himself. The advantage of this was that He Yuchen ate very well. He didn't procrastinate and didn't rely on his parents. Poplar Fruit watched and silently made a note in his heart. In the future, he would educate Kiki like this. He Yuchen quickly finished his meal. He wasn't in the mood to chat with his father and the others. He was very active and fun, so he rushed out after washing the dishes. After a while, he and Dahe's laughter came from the yard. He and Dahe are good friends. Chinchin often played with Dahe when he was young. Ji Xiaoyan smiled and said, but at that time he was still in the military camp. "I also want to raise a dog for Kiki," Poplar Fruit said, "but I haven't thought about what kind of dog to raise yet. I don't know where to buy it." He had this idea when he was in his hometown. At that time, he took a few photos of Kiki and Fu, which received a lot of praise from netizens on the internet. Many people strongly suggested that Poplar Fruit buy Kiki a puppy and let the puppy grow up with Kiki. That would be a very happy and beautiful thing. It didn't matter if it was a puppy or a big dog. Poplar Fruit had also seen many photos of babies and dogs getting along harmoniously. It was very touching. He also wanted Kiki to have such a beautiful childhood. "I have a suggestion." Ji Xiaoyan heard Poplar Fruit's words and said, "You can go to the stray dog rescue station and have a look. If you find a dog that you like, you can go through the formalities and bring it home. You can also indirectly help those poor dogs. You can kill 2 birds with 1 stone." It turned out that Ji Xiaoyan's elementary school had taken students to visit the stray dog rescue station some time ago and volunteered to help clean the kennels for homeless dogs. Since then, Ji Xiaoyan had been paying attention to these dogs and wanted to help them find families to adopt them. Seeing that Poplar Fruit still had some concerns, Ji Xiaoyan smiled and said, "Stray dogs are actually not as terrible as you think. They are well taken care of at the rescue station. Every dog has been vaccinated, and they are very sensible. Now that the winter is so cold, I don't know if they can survive this cold winter. If you have the ability, you might as well help them." Thinking of the whistling cold wind outside, Poplar Fruit felt a little sympathetic. He asked Ji Xiaoyan for the address of the rescue station and decided to find time to take a look. Chapter 137. In Yangcheng's winter, There were no bald branches with withered leaves, nor was there the sound of the moon and crows, nor was there 1,000 miles of ice and snow. Looking around, the grass and trees were still green, but it was a dull green. Even the lights in the cold wind were dim, and the people were dressed clumsily. It was as if everything was lacking a bit of purity, a bit of vitality, a bit of bleakness, and a lot of lack of poetic beauty. But at least there was sunlight, nature's most beautiful gift in this winter. After Kiki recovered from her cold, Poplar Fruit didn't bring her out for a walk in the morning. But in the afternoon, when the sun was shining and the outside wasn't so cold, he would bring Kiki out to bask in the sun. There was a prerequisite for basking in the sun. Poplar Fruit wouldn't casually carry Kiki outside. Kiki was, after all, too young, and her body's immune system was weak, so it was easy for her to catch a cold. Normally, he would wrap Chi-Chi tightly in a small blanket and carry her out after feeding her milk in the afternoon. In the beginning, he was a bit embarrassed because the quilt and straps were the specialty of the village aunties when they were taking care of their children. When he walked out, Poplar Fruit was still avoiding people's strange gazes. But later on, he felt relieved. It wasn't a big deal. Kiki had been taken care of by him for the past 8 months. At that time, he was busy and didn't have money or good clothes. But didn't he still carry her out on the streets? Now that he had some money, he was shameless. He wanted face and didn't want his daughter? This wouldn't do. Poplar Fruit deeply reflected on himself. But going out like this, Poplar Fruit didn't feel conflicted anymore. But Kiki wasn't satisfied. Kiki didn't like being tied down. She liked to move her hands and feet freely, especially when she was wrapped up tightly like a mummy. It was especially uncomfortable and she struggled to get out. And Kiki frowned and twisted around, trying to find an opening to pull her little arm out. Don't move! Poplar Fruit held Kiki down and clamped her little arm through the quilt. Ah! Kiki anxiously let out a string of trembling sounds. She shouted, Want. It's useless even if you make a fuss. Poplar Fruit smiled and didn't relax. Kiki was anxious and aggrieved. She pursed her lips and cried. Hearing her cries, if it wasn't for the fact that there weren't many people outside, people would have thought that something had happened. Chi-Chi's weeping beauty looked very pitiful as large teardrops rolled down her cheeks incessantly. But Poplar Fruit noticed that although Kiki's eyes were hazy from crying, she would stop crying after a few times to see her father's reaction. Poplar Fruit was angry and amused at the same time. But at this time, no matter how soft-hearted he was, he wouldn't let Kiki struggle out of the quilt and let her frail little body face the very cold air. Don't cry! Poplar Fruit scolded Kiki with a rare stern face. If you cry again, I won't bring you out next time. Kiki didn't understand what her father said at all, but she could feel the change in her father's mood. Poplar Fruit wiped Kiki's tears with a small handkerchief. Kiki sobbed while looking at her father's stern big face in fear. Her voice gradually stopped. She still felt a little wronged, but she didn't dare to cry again. Poplar Fruit wiped away the tears on Kiki's face. Otherwise, they would dry up when the wind blew. That's more like it. Poplar Fruit kissed Kiki's little face with satisfaction. If you want to play, later when we get home, I'll let you play to your heart's content. But Kiki was still very young. She often forgot the pain after the scar healed. The next time they came out, she would struggle and cry again. Poplar Fruit could only patiently teach her a lesson every time. This was all a small episode. Sunbathing in the winter was actually a very happy thing. Strolling by the artificial lake in the residential area, the father and daughter pair dominated the whole scenery. Although it was only a man-made garden on this winter afternoon, it had a different style. The warm sunlight spilled down and landed on the calm and still surface of the lake, refracting gorgeous colors. When it landed on the wilted and withered grass tips, it flowed with a lustrous luster. When it landed on Chi-Chi's delicate and rosy little face, it spread with a holy light. Kiki squinted her eyes comfortably under the sunlight and smiled happily. Against the sunlight, Poplar Fruit looked at Kiki. It was as if they had returned to the peak of Mount Huangshan during their graduation trip. Between the sea of clouds and the mountain, there was a seven-colored Buddha's light. It was so beautiful that it made people want to kneel on the ground. Wasn't Kiki the same at this time? On Friday night, Poplar Fruit took Kiki to Godmother's house. Song Jiwin and his family had finally returned. Because they had brought back delicious home-raised chickens from their hometown, Godmother Lu Suchin called Poplar Fruit over for dinner. After passing the order, Song Jiwin said with a smile, "Old Gua, I left you alone on the winter solstice, so I'll make up for it today." Poplar Fruit didn't agree with Song Jiwin's words. The words "make up for it" weren't wrong, but the target of "make up for it" wasn't Poplar Fruit. It was definitely the gluttonous Song Jiwin. When they arrived at Godmother's house, Poplar Fruit was the one cooking. Because they were going back to their hometown, and it was the winter solstice, Lu Suchin gave the housekeeper at home a holiday and asked her to go back and celebrate the festival with her family. So instead of saying that it was a meal for Poplar Fruit, it was better to say that it was a meal for Song Jiwin himself. Godmother had already taken the home-raised chickens from their hometown to the market in the afternoon and found someone to kill them and clean their hair and internal organs. They were placed in the basket in white strips, saving Poplar Fruit a lot of trouble. The other ingredients were also bought. When Poplar Fruit came, he just rolled up his sleeves and went to work. Song Jiwin wanted to slack off, but Godmother wouldn't let him. She took a broom and rushed him from the sofa to the kitchen to help Poplar Fruit. "You choose and wash the vegetables," Poplar Fruit commanded. He was handling the naked chicken at this time. Although Song Jiwin's face was unhappy and he complained about his mother's inhumanity, he was still very diligent and worked hard. He didn't look like he cut corners at all when choosing and washing the vegetables. Song Jiwin's hometown was very famous for raising chickens. Because the climate was mild, the rainfall was abundant, and the land was fertile. Agriculture, forestry, animal husbandry, sideline, and fishing could all be developed in an all-round way. The local agricultural products were mainly rice, barley, wheat, corn, cassava, sweet potatoes, peanuts, and soybeans, which provided the main source of feed for raising chickens. The local terrain was mainly mountains and hills, with green bamboos and shrubs. It was evergreen all year round, and there were more insects. In addition, there were a lot of rivers and streams, which were rich in fish, shrimp, snails, clams, and other byproducts. There was rich natural bait, which provided more animal protein feed for raising chickens. Moreover, domesticated chickens generally didn't use feed containing hormones. Most of them were free-range, so although the domesticated chickens in their hometown were small in size, they had developed fat under the skin and between the muscles. They were famous for their delicious meat, thin skin, and soft bones. The best way to cook domesticated chickens was to cut them. Although Poplar Fruit had already eaten it at Iwunjua's house during the winter solstice, the raw materials this time were much better, so Poplar Fruit still chose to make the cut chicken. After washing the big pot, he put in the whole chicken that had just been processed again and added water. He then turned on the fire to boil the water. While waiting, Poplar Fruit didn't stay idle. He began to prepare the other dishes. "Okay." Seeing Song Jiwin working hard at the side, Poplar Fruit rolled his eyes, and an idea popped up in his mind. He turned around and ran outside, turned off the switch of the water heater, and then returned to the kitchen. He continued to do what he was doing without batting an eyelid. He washed the carrots, the pork, the pot, the dishes, and the chopping board. His movements were very smooth. In a short while, the hot water stored in the water heater was used up. Poplar Fruit snickered and stood in front of the gas stove. He used chopsticks to flip the chicken every 5 minutes and quietly watched the situation. Song Jiwin sang a rap song and leisurely chose the dishes. He picked up the big pot and turned on the tap to prepare to wash it. "Oh!" Song Jiwin wailed like a ghost and howled like a wolf. He had just put his hand into the basin when he jumped up. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" His godmother nervously ran over. "Did you cut your hand?" It's okay, it's okay," Poplar Fruit said while holding back his laughter. "Who said it's okay?" Song Jiwin angrily complained. "Lao Gua, you're too hateful. You secretly turn off the hot water. Mom, you don't know how cold the water is. It's so cold that my fingers are going to fall off." Huh? Poplar Fruit couldn't help but laugh. How cold can it be? Lu Suqin looked at Song Jiwen with disdain and said, "You can't even take a little bit of hardship. When I was young, I didn't have a water heater, but didn't I still wash clothes outside the house?" Thinking back to those years. Okay, I was wrong, okay. His mother was about to start nagging again. Song Jiwen felt his scalp tighten. He smiled bitterly and wiped his fingers that were still dripping with water on his clothes. He pushed his mother out, not letting her repeat the old story over and over again. This isn't over. Song Jiwen exaggeratedly used his finger that was red from the cold to draw a line across his neck as he threatened coldly. Poplar Fruit pretended that he didn't see it. He laughed in his heart and continued to cook the white-cut chicken. After cooking the white-cut chicken, Poplar Fruit used 2 chopsticks to take it out and put it on a plate to wait for it to cool. After cooking the other dishes, he cut it open. It's delicious. After they started eating, Song Jiwen picked up the white and tender drumstick and ate it heartily. Under the delicacies, he forgot about the prank of taking revenge on Yang Guo. Lu Suqin held Kiki and scolded Poplar Fruit. "Poplar Fruit, did you forget to buy moisturizer for Kiki?" "Ah, moisturizer?" Poplar Fruit was surprised. For rough men like him, products like moisturizer were for delicate women. He never thought of it. "I knew you didn't." Lu Suqin held Kiki in front of Poplar Fruit and said, "Look, Kiki's face is purple from the cold. If you don't use some moisturizer in winter, it will be too late for you to regret it when your skin is dry and cracked." Poplar Fruit knew that he was wrong. He nodded desperately and promised Lu Suqin that he would buy some moisturizer later. Lu Suqin shook her head and sighed in her heart. Poplar Fruit was a man taking care of a child. How could he be as considerate as a woman? Poplar Fruit's small family was still short of a woman. Chapter 138. After eating, Poplar Fruit came back from his godmother's house. He ran to the baby product store and bought some moisturizer for Kiki before returning home. At the entrance of the residential area, Yang Guo received the express delivery from the security guard and asked them to collect it on her behalf. The current logistics system was still very criticized, especially the state-run EMS. The book sent by Zheng Yuji across thousands of kilometers of mountains and rivers. After several days, it finally arrived in the hands of Poplar Fruit. When he got home, Poplar Fruit opened the package with a knife and took out 2 books. The original English and Chinese translation of Young Pai's Fantasy Drifting. Touching the thickness, the original English book was not as thick as the biography of Steve Jobs. It didn't take much time to finish reading such a book. However, Poplar Fruit didn't plan to read it immediately, because the next day, he had to go to the stray dog rescue station introduced by his sister-in-law, Ji Xiaoyan. After searching on the internet, Poplar Fruit also had a certain understanding of the stray dog rescue station. The stray dog rescue station was started by a very caring old couple. They first rented a piece of land in a deserted mountain area on the outskirts of the city and then built a kennel. They got attention because they took in some dogs that had encountered misfortune. Because of several reports in the news, the stray dog rescue station received more attention. Many dog enthusiasts enthusiastically donated money to the stray dog rescue station. With their funding, the stray dog rescue station was maintained year after year. Some college student volunteers also helped to set up a public homepage for the stray dog rescue station so that Poplar Fruit could browse its relevant information. Most of the stray dog rescue stations took in dogs. They were all stray on the street and were sent there by kind but incompetent people. Some dogs were disabled, some were sick, some had been abused, and some had even almost become a delicacy in dog meat restaurants. They were rescued and sent here. They were carefully taken care of and treated by the kind couple and the volunteers who came and went. Slowly, they regained their former vitality. Many of the stray dogs here were adopted back and felt the warmth of home again. Of course, the rescue station didn't just take in dogs. There were also some stray cats and other poor animals. However, cats and dogs were different. They were more adapted to the life of a stray. They were more vigilant and appeared less in people's sight. Many years had passed, and the size of the aid station had doubled. The main entrance, which was originally covered in cement, was now slightly repaired. The big iron door had also been replaced with a glass door and a drop-down iron gate. There was a wooden sign hanging above the door with the words "Stray Dog Rescue Station" engraved in ink. No one's name was attached. The kind couple only wanted to save the poor dogs and did not seek any credit. Poplar Fruit looked at them in awe. Poplar Fruit didn't go out until after 9 o'clock. It was too early, and the weather was still very cold. Poplar Fruit carried Kiki on a sling. When they arrived at the rescue station, it was almost noon. Pushing open the glass door of the rescue station, Poplar Fruit saw a petite, sweet-looking girl holding a notebook and making notes. She looked at each cage one by one and poked her head with a pen from time to time. The room was not too big. It was estimated to be more than 30 or 40 square meters. 2 rows of iron cages were neatly arranged on both sides of the wall. There were a few simple tables in the middle, so there was not much room for movement. Poplar Fruit could clearly hear the sounds of cats and dogs in the cages. "Hello!" Poplar Fruit smiled and greeted the girl. The girl heard him and raised her head. She saw a tall figure coming through the light screen at the door. It was like a scene that could only be seen in movies. When Poplar Fruit came closer, she saw Poplar Fruit's handsome smile. It was as she had imagined. He was really a handsome guy. The girl was in a daze for a while. Suddenly, she blushed and said softly, "Hello." Poplar Fruit looked at the girl's clothes. Black plush pantyhose, indigo denim shorts, and a beige long-sleeve sweater. She looked very youthful and fashionable. Of course, there was a sense of elegance over warmth. Poplar Fruit paid more attention to the girl's red vest and the cap on her head. The words "Rescue Station" were embroidered on the cap with yellow thread. Poplar Fruit asked curiously, "Excuse me, are you a staff member of the rescue station?" The girl was still in a daze. She was a little shy. She wanted to look, but did not dare to look at Poplar Fruit's face. She only reacted when Poplar Fruit asked again. "No." The girl shook her head like a rattle drum and answered straightforwardly, "Ah." Poplar Fruit was confused. "No." The girl realized that her expression was wrong. She hurriedly waved her hand and said word by word, "No, I mean, we are not staff here. We are volunteers. It means that we are here to do volunteer work." The girl felt that she did not make it clear enough and added another sentence. After saying that, she regretted it because the explanation she had just added was like nonsense in retrospect. Although the air was cold, the girl's face was still hot. She felt so embarrassed that she wanted to cover her face and find a hole to hide in. So she was a volunteer. Poplar Fruit was even more confused. He looked around. Other than the barking dogs, the father and daughter, and the girl in front of him, there was no one else. "You guys?" Poplar Fruit was a little surprised and asked. "Yes." The girl opened her mouth. Before the girl could explain again, the side door on Poplar Fruit's right side opened with a squeak and hit the wall with a clang. Suddenly, the air outside poured in, bringing with it a little cold. Poplar Fruit looked over and saw a girl wearing an apron and a straw hat stumbling in. After coming in, she did not forget to hook the side door with her heel and close it again. The cold wind that had been cut off from its source finally stopped, and the room temperature slowly rose. "Apricot, come and help. It's so heavy." The girl in the straw hat was bent over, and her hands were struggling to carry a black bucket. The bucket was heavy, and she was staggering as she walked. Poplar Fruit quickly walked forward, bent down, put his hand on the handle of the bucket, and said with a smile, "Let go. Let me do it." "Ah." Seeing a man's hand and hearing a man's voice, the girl wearing the straw hat was stunned for a moment and said, "Okay. Thank you." The girl handed the bucket to Poplar Fruit, stood up, wiped the sweat with the back of her hand, and raised her head. The straw hat was raised, and a delicate and familiar face was revealed. Can you guess who? Chapter 139. Thank you. The girl in the straw hat straightened her body, wiped her sweat with the back of her hand, and raised her head. With the straw hat raised, a delicate and familiar face was revealed. Poplar Fruit looked and was stunned. That oval-shaped face, those beautiful eyes that overflowed with spiritual energy, and those sweat-drenched bangs were so familiar, so moving. Fong Bebe? Poplar Fruit couldn't believe his eyes and asked with some surprise. Weird uncle? Fong Bebe also recognized the big boy in front of her at a glance. She also called out in surprise. Why are you here? It's really you. Poplar Fruit lifted the wooden bucket effortlessly and stood up straight, laughed and said, I was just going to ask, why are you here? And you're dressed like this. The girl in front of him was the same as the one Poplar Fruit saw at the east lake of his alma mater, as if she walked out of a fairyland, but with the liveliness of the mortal world. She was as beautiful as a painting. However, at that time, what he saw was the Shi Shi Huan Sha painting. The beauty of the beautiful fish was intoxicating. And now, what he saw in front of him was another Zhao Jun Shui painting. The travel-worn one couldn't help but feel pity for her. Kiki, who was behind Poplar Fruit, didn't fall asleep. She seemed to have heard Fong Bebe's voice and couldn't help but move her body and poke her head out from behind her father's back. Fong Bebe and Poplar Fruit stood face to face and just happened to see Kiki's little head sticking out. Even though she was wearing a pink knitted hat and only her round little face could be seen, Fong Bebe still immediately recognized Kiki. She shouted in surprise, Kiki! Kiki saw Fong Bebe and was stunned for a moment, but when she heard Fong Bebe's call, she was immediately happy. Not knowing if she recognized Fong Bebe, she patted Poplar Fruit's back and even stretched her legs, happily giggling. Daddy, daddy, na-na. In her excitement, she couldn't even pronounce the word na clearly. After that, Poplar Fruit couldn't understand. When Kiki first met Fong Bebe, she was about 2 months old. It had been half a year since then. How could a child who didn't know anything recognize her? It must be that Fong Bebe's charm was too great. Yes, it must be, Poplar Fruit firmly believed. At this time, Poplar Fruit was still silently criticizing Fong Bebe for being too biased. She remembered Kiki's name clearly, but couldn't remember his own name. Not only did she call him by the nickname she gave him, but she also added the word strange back. Kiki, you're here too. Fong Bebe happily ran behind Poplar Fruit and greeted Kiki. Do you still remember Sister Bebe? She chatted happily with Kiki across the air, and Poplar Fruit could only stand there with the bucket, unable to move. The girl named Xingzi was also dumbfounded. Things had developed too quickly, and she couldn't figure it out. A handsome man came into the house, and before she could get to know him better, her little friend appeared, and she actually knew him. Then, a little baby suddenly appeared behind the handsome man. If this wasn't a godly turn of events, then what was? Sister Bebe's hands are still very dirty. I'll play with you later, okay? Fong Bebe said to Kiki with a smile. Strange uncle, come, help me kick it over. Fong Bebe walked to the side of the cage and waved at Poplar Fruit. The bucket was filled with dog food made from rice and pig liver. Such a big bucket was very heavy. No wonder Fong Bebe was staggering when she walked, but this was nothing for Poplar Fruit, and he easily carried it over with one hand. Bebe, Bebe! The girl named Xingzi ran over and was about to grab Fong Bebe's hand. Don't, it's very dirty. I just cleaned the kennel inside, and I haven't washed the apron and other things. Fong Bebe quickly moved away, not letting her come closer. Bebe, so you know each other? The girl named Xingzi didn't come closer, and she stood at the side and asked, Oh, we used to know each other? Fong Bebe smiled and said, Let me introduce you. This is my university roommate, my best friend, Lin Xingshan. Fong Bebe turned the spoon in her hand and pointed at Poplar Fruit, and then introduced, This is Strange Uncle. According to him, he is our senior. It's a senior, Lin Xingshan exclaimed. Don't listen to her nonsense. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly. My name is Poplar Fruit, Muyi Yang, Gua as in fruit. I also graduated from Higashiyama University. Then call him Brother Yang. Lin Xingshan said sweetly. Call him Strange Uncle. Call him Brother, Brother. Be careful. He will take you to see the goldfish. Fong Bebe couldn't help but laugh. And Kiki, that is Strange Uncle's daughter. I haven't seen her for almost a semester. and she can already speak. I wonder if she has grown up a little? When Kiki heard her name, she poked her head out and looked around in confusion. Then, she looked at Fong Beibei and smiled foolishly. Fong Beibei was full of smiles when she introduced Kiki. Poplar Fruit's treatment was completely different from Kiki's. He stood there with a bitter smile while holding the bucket. Put it down. Why are you standing there stupidly? Fong Beibei noticed and shouted. It's okay. It's not heavy. Poplar Fruit explained. At this time, Fong Beibei had already walked up. She leaned over and pulled the bucket for Poplar Fruit to put it down. It's really heavy. Fong Beibei's palm was sweaty, and it just happened to press on Poplar Fruit's hand. The soft and warm feeling was immediately transmitted to Poplar Fruit's heart. It was like a small stone thrown into a calm water surface, causing ripples. Fong Beibei also felt it. Her pretty face was hot, and she let go of her hand as if nothing had happened. She pretended that nothing had happened and said, You can put it down. No, it's really not heavy. If you don't believe me, look. Poplar Fruit pulled the wooden bucket up and down as if he was holding a dumbbell. Okay. Fong Beibei said anxiously, If you are not afraid of being tired, just carry it. Don't knock down the dog's lunch. Lin Xingshan, on the other hand, was very supportive. She clapped her hands in surprise and admiration. Fong Beibei began to spoon food for the dogs in the hall. She was very patient. She scooped different amounts of dog food for each dog according to its size and physical condition. Poplar Fruit carried the bucket and followed her step by step. The two cooperated very well for the first time. Whoa! Seeing the arrival of Fong Beibei, the hungry dogs ran to the door of the cage, wagging their tails, waiting for Fong Beibei's spoon to fall. They immediately bowed their heads and wolfed down the food. There were also a few cats. They were also hungry. They paced back and forth in the cage, showing that they didn't care at all, but they couldn't help but look over, revealing their desire. This is not for you to eat, Fong Beibei said to them. I will give you cat food later. How could the noble and cold meow planet people respond? They raised their heads and turned back with their tails up. However, it didn't take long for them to wander out again. They glanced at the empty food trough, yawned discontentedly, and bared their sharp teeth. The dog food in the wooden bucket gradually reached more than half. Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei also came to the other row. Lin Xingshan looked at them from the side and suddenly said, Brother Yang, what are you doing at our rescue station? Don't tell me you're here to help our Beauty Bay work? How could that be? Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei said in unison. I only know now that Fong Beibei is here. How could it be on purpose? Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Then what are you here for? Fong Beibei said as she scooped lunch for the dogs. Poplar Fruit remembered the purpose of his visit today. He said, I'm here to adopt a puppy. I said I wanted to raise a dog, so a friend recommended me to come here. Poplar Fruit explained. Fong Beibei looked at Poplar Fruit with a strange look and said, If you want to raise a dog, why don't you go to a pet shop? Fong Beibei's bright eyes seemed to be able to see through people's minds. Poplar Fruit scratched his head with his empty left hand and said a little embarrassedly, My friend said that these puppies are still very pitiful, and now the winter is so cold. When the weather gets colder, I'm afraid they won't be able to survive. I think so too. Since I want to raise a dog, I will do my part and help if I can, Poplar Fruit said. The two women burst into laughter. Lin Xingshan was the most exaggerated. She was laughing so hard that she was convulsing. Fong Beibei laughed and said, It's not as exaggerated as you say. Our rescue station also has cold protection measures in winter. Ah? Poplar Fruit was dumbfounded. Lin Xingshan covered her mouth and tried not to laugh. She explained, Dogs are not as delicate as you think. Look, we have cotton pads here. As long as the door is not open during winter, they will be fine. Poplar Fruit looked in the direction of her finger. A cotton-filled round mat was placed at the bottom of the kennel. He thought of Ah Fu in his hometown. It was lying in the house at night in winter, but it was alive and kicking during the day. Only then did he realize that his idea was too naive. But, strange uncle, Since you are so kind, please support our work. Seeing Poplar Fruit's embarrassed look, Fong Beibei said with a smile, in fact, they are very miserable. There is no owner to play with them here. Help these poor dogs. Poplar Fruit looked at her smile and felt warm in his heart. He could not help but nod and say, okay. But Poplar Fruit suddenly changed the topic and said, can you not call me strange uncle? Call me by my name? No, Fong Beibei said without raising her head. She scooped dog food for the last puppy and then divided the rest among the larger puppies. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly and followed her with the wooden bucket. But Fong Beibei threw the spoon into the wooden bucket, clapped her hands, and said mischievously, as a reward, you can remove the word strange. Why do I feel like I have heard of it before? Fong Beibei turned around and walked away with her hands behind her back, leaving behind a string of bell-like laughter. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.